Thank you, Akan. Pada acaranya.
Laka, please hide the participant list on the screen.
So thank you for the great work that you did. We're all grateful for all the fighters. So we can proceed to prayer session, so we can stand and remember our fighters, our people that have lost their lives. So let's stand and pray for a minute. Thank you. So today's session will be in English and Tigray, I guess, whichever you are comfortable. You can tell us about Mai Kadra massacre. The floor is yours, Melita. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sahafte. Hi, everyone. My name is Melita Brahana Mescal, and I'm a proud Tigrayan who lives in Denver, Colorado. I ended up here because of a genocide when I was just before I was born. So this is unfortunately not new to Tigray, but I think we're heading in a different direction of this never happening again after this most recent genocide. So as you know, and as was mentioned, I like many of you, basically dropped my entire life to fight for our families who were in complete darkness. And I did a lot of work with various organizations, but with Tigray Media House. And so if you recall, and I know you do, there was a complete blackout in Tigray. And so we couldn't get any information. So the best thing we could do was to go to Sudan to talk to refugees. And so I joined Tigray Media House and went to Sudan. At that time, I think Lilith had just gone and talked to some of the initial refugees. And so we were among the first to go and talk to our families to see what was happening, because the stories we heard were horrendous. And one of the major stories, obviously, was the Mai Kadra massacre. And the tragedy of Mai Kadra, and there's still a lot of work that we need to do around this, but the tragedy was how the story was twisted to make it appear as if Tigrayans were the attackers, as if Tigrayans were committing genocide, essentially, on other ethnic groups, primarily Amhara, who live in Western Tigray and parts of Western Tigray. So when I first heard the story, I remember being devastated because, we read the Amnesty International reports, and we hear all these stories that are coming out, and the stories were awful. And I'll admit that I was heartbroken initially, thinking, why and how could Tagaro do this to their neighbors and family? That was the story that was being given. And so I just knew there was something that wasn't true about that. Just deep down inside, I obviously couldn't prove it at the time. So when we went to Sudan, one of our initial projects was to figure out the truth about what happened in Mai Kadra, to talk to as many people as we can. And so we went to 3 of the 4 camps in Sudan, and spoke with refugees, and we just asked their stories. How did you get here? What happened? What happened in Mai Kadra? And the people from Mai Kadra were spread among the different camps. And so for me, it was really powerful to get these different stories and then look back later and see how they were the same. They were telling the same story, even in different camps. So you knew there was truth in what they were saying. And the story is not that Tagaru were slaughtering people. It didn't make sense on so many levels, because why would I be the perpetrator and flee as a refugee? There were just things that didn't align. I want to remind you too that there were lots of concentration camps set up throughout Ethiopia holding innocent Tigrayans just because of their identity. Well, one of the first camps is in Mai Kadra. That was the Abadi warehouse. And I got so many stories from people there. And in particular, there were 3 young sisters who were held in that in that warehouse, in that camp. concentration camp, and the stories that they told about, for example, a pregnant woman who they wouldn't allow her to leave to give birth outside of that. It was a warehouse essentially, and how the people who were there put their money together that they had on them, and they were able to gather the equivalent of about $1,000, and they 1,000, but actually not dollars, and they gave that to a guard who they bribed. They essentially bribed the guard to allow this woman who just had a baby to leave to get care. I mean, those were the kinds of stories. Initially we heard in those initial reports that the Ethiopian government was sharing, they were saying things like there were Tigrayan gangsters called Saluk, and these were the ones who were going town to town, killing innocent others, so non-Tigrayans. Well, it's worth noting that we've never heard anything about Saluk again. After that one initial report, we never, ever again heard that. But we have heard of Fano over and over and over again, right? With machetes and things that, the tools they were using to slaughter people like animals, basically. So I think it's worth noting and remembering, some of the things that were said that just disappeared into thin air all of a sudden. The story that I learned in piecing together the interviews with different people was that initially the government aligned forces swept through the city, and the people did nothing. You kind of back out of the way. You let the soldiers come through, and they were immediately followed by Fano. And when Fano came in, they went on a killing spree. They were killing any and everybody. And initially, the people said, well, even when things like this have happened, women and children and elderly usually are not the targets. So the men fled. And when they fled, and then the stories were coming to them in like the cornfields or whatever fields that they fled to, because don't forget, this is a farming community and it was harvest season. So people are able to, hide among the tall stalks and things. I've never been to Western Tigray, so forgive me if I'm not accurately describing it. However, they were hearing stories that even women were being killed and children were being killed. And so the men start to come back. And by the way, they're hearing these stories because now women are coming and children are coming out into these fields to hide. And so in a panic, people are going back to find their families. The men are going back because they didn't mean to leave their families. They just assumed they would be safe, but no one was safe. So the family separation was really intense. The other key thing that kept showing up, and I went back and reread a lot of my notes from 4 years ago from these interviews, but another thing that kept coming up was there was always a translator. There was somebody, and they identified them as being from Welkite, and they would translate and point out who were the Tigrayans so that they could identify who was who. Because another thing Tigrayans did to survive was pretend they weren't Tigrayan. They would say, no, I'm from Welkite, or I'm Amhara, or whatever, just to not be killed.
Recording in progress.
So that was another key thing. There were some sisters that I spoke with, the 3 that I mentioned to you, who, for every bad story, there was a good story. So, they shared a story with me how one of their neighbors who wasn't Amhara hid them in their home for over a week because, there's always good among the evil, and it's easy just to paint entire cultures or communities with a brush, but, everything is much more detailed than that. And so, anyway, they spoke about a family that hid them in their home they were hiding under beds. Imagine just hiding under the bed for weeks, because you never know when a soldier is going to show up or when Fano is going to show up. But eventually that family was afraid, and they said, we want to help you, but it could cost us our lives. And so they had to leave. And they actually took them to the Abadi warehouse, where they then were in that concentration camp until they were able to sneak out. And the way they snuck out was there was a bread delivery every couple of weeks. They were constantly hungry, constantly thirsty, but there would be a bread delivery. And in one of those deliveries, the girls were able to, something was set up, and they were able to dress as the bread makers or, part of that company, and they snuck out with them. So, there's all these stories of resilience and how people survived. But I have to say that Mai Kadra gave the world an excuse and a reason to turn away, because they were able to say, well, you guys started it. You guys are the ones who went and massacred a bunch of people. And then in retaliation, your people were massacred. That's why you're in Sudan. And we know that's not true. And, when we first did the story with Tigray Media House, we were able to, some people who are much better than me with like technology and all of these things, were able to go into like the Wikipedias and update the citations and include some of the stories. With Tagat's also published a story that I wrote about Mai Kadra, and we were able to source that, because you have to source when you're updating on Wikipedia. But I went and checked it today, and a lot of it has been flipped back. So some of our story is still in there, but the story is still saying that Tigrayans were the ones who committed all the atrocities. So I think a big job that we have as Tegaru, and I say this so much that you probably already know I'm going to say this, is that we don't tell our story ever, the good or the bad. So we have to do the work and make sure this story about Mai Kadra is told accurately. It's one thing to remember, it's one thing to pay homage, we should do that. It's one thing to keep fighting for survivors, because of course Western Tigray is still occupied. These people still can't go back home. Their entire lives have been stripped from them. In Sudan, a lot of those refugees are in the worst conditions because Sudan is at war now. And we're fighting so many fires that you don't even know where to look. Where do you turn? What do you do next? But we have to win the media messaging fight. We have to. And so I don't know who's watching, who's into technology and this kind of thing, but we have to make sure that, when you Google Mai Kadra massacre, in the worst case scenario, it has to say it's contested what happened there. I mean, we know the truth, but for it to say that Tigrayans were the perpetrators is the biggest lie ever told. And it's the reason why it gave the West a reason to say, well, to kind of doubt what we were saying and what our stories were. So I guess we're 4 years out and we've come a very long way, but there's still so much to do. And one of my big calls to action for anyone who that this resonates with is we have to start sourcing some of these online, databases and make sure that they tell the truth, or at least tell part of our story. So I think that's a huge thing we have to do. And I hope that we can keep holding our government accountable in Tigray, especially related to Western Tigray and all of the IDPs and all of the help that they need, regardless of who is in power or who is in control. They always have to be held accountable. So I hope that, at this 4-year mark, we're able to kind of refocus and realign and make sure that these people who have been, brutalized over and over and over again are still at the top of our conversation. So I think that's really all that I wanted to say this morning. Thank you for having me. And I don't know if there are questions, but if not, I thank you so much.
Thank you, Melita and Fatma. You work really hard to bring this to us. It's not easy to just, debunk the stories it's coming from the Ethiopians and other groups, because Mai Kadra is a base, and that's without that we cannot claim the Tigray genocide. So we have to work hard and we have to set the agenda. That's what I believe, and we have to remember we tried our best, but it's like we are behind. But thank you so much. If you have anything for Melita before she go, I can give 1 minute to the hostess or co-hostess. Okay, thank you. Laaka Mo's, because she's traveling, she made that happen in this 1 minute. All right.
Let me take a second to ask her a question. So thank you for the briefing talk. I would like to ask you to clarify on the ethical human rights report and how the organization itself is used as an excuse to both downplay genocide or ongoing genocide, and at the same time justify reasons for committing genocide.
Oh, that's a great question because you're right. So here's the thing. I want to connect some dots. So when you think about all of the aid agencies that were being removed from Tigray, forcibly removed by the Ethiopian regime, they do it for a reason, because these aid agencies, yes, they deliver food, yes, they deliver various types of aid and medicine and these things, but they also document what they see. And so they're also humans, and they also can get things wrong, right? And so we rely on those sort of independent, I guess, eyes to tell a story when the world refuses to, they're not going to believe a victim or a perpetrator unless there's some other party that can clarify or confirm, I guess, what they saw. So what happened in Mai Kadra was when that initial, and I had to piece this together, like looking at all of these interviews, there was definitely gosh, when they explain it in Tigray, it makes so much more sense. But there was definitely a clash that happened, basically. So when Fano began attacking people, Tigrayans didn't see it coming. They did not see it coming at all. Everyone knew war was coming in terms of, between these government officials, but they weren't anticipating what happened to the people. This was a war on the people, which is not what they anticipated. So initially they were caught off guard, but they also fought back with whatever they had at the time. So if you think about it, it was farming season, harvesting season. So people had machetes. They had the tools that they use in the farms, not as weapons. They're literally, there's all these, seasonal workers there. I mean, there's lots happening in this part of Tigray. So when they're being attacked, at some point they fight back. So once it becomes clear this is a war on the people and that Tigrayans need to leave or die, they begin to flee. And so they're out of there. Meanwhile, the Fano who led this whole attack, they go to get treatment with these different aid groups. So think about that. Tigrayans have fled or died because a lot of them died, and their bodies were left to rot on the street as a message to terrorize any Tigrayans who were still there. So when these aid agencies are seeing all of these Fano, Amharo basically, being treated, the story they're telling them is they attacked us. We were just, farming. We came to work or whatever it was, and they attacked us. So to the aid agency or to these human rights, not human rights, but aid groups or whatever, the story they get is, wow, yeah, I know, they came to me. I saw the guy who was hit with the machete, So when they tell that story, that's the story that is given to these human rights organizations. And so then they interview these folks who are flat out lying about what happened to them. In a way, I mean, sure, they were hit, but there was a clash, and there's a whole different, bigger story and lots of details that are left out. So I believe these human rights organizations have good intentions. I don't believe that they just are nefarious or they're trying to tell a single story. I do think that they try really hard. But you have to always dig deeper and ask another question, you know what I mean? And try to get to the truth. The other side of that is there was a complete blackout in Tigray. So you couldn't ask any more questions. No one was allowed in. The Ethiopian government was very strategic in not allowing anybody to be there. So those initial reports are not a lie of the aid agencies or even of the human rights organizations. It was, you have to go all the way back to the source and how they got that initial information. But what upsets me is there hasn't been an attempt to fix that story or to tell the whole picture. We've tried, as Tagaro, we've worked hard. And I know sometimes we look at it and we're like, nothing, we didn't do enough. We didn't get what we wanted. People are still suffering. Nobody knows the truth, and we beat ourselves up. I know I do. I know probably all of you do. But we've come a long way in telling our story and trying to get the truth out there. But it's going to be on us. I when I came back from Sudan, I was sending all my videos, all the videos that I took to Amnesty International, trying to get the story to be more complete, or Human Rights Watch, or, all of these different groups. So it's sort of the best that we can do until, we're sort of out of the fire, because I would argue we're still in the fire. I mean, we're talking about Mai Kadra, and we can't even go to Mai Kadra. If we went back home, we can't even access the land right now. So clearly we're not out of the fire. But we do have big stories that we need to tell and document. And whether those organizations will probably not. I was going to say whether they'll ever get it right. I think they move on to the next issue at some point, as opposed to continuing to, fight for the current issue. But it's going to be on us to be able to tell those stories. But I think that's how you end up with stories that don't make sense with these organizations. So with this, it was like an aha moment for me when I talked to all these people, and then, was going back and rereading my notes and rewatching the videos. And I'm like, wait, I see see how this happened. You know, it became clear to me all of a sudden. But in any event, we're all here because we care about the people of Tigray. We're here because we care about what happened to them and what will happen to them. And so, you know, these reports did a lot of damage and gave, you know, Abiy Ahmed a lot of power to be able to say, look at these people, like they deserve it, basically, you know, was how he used that report. And the world bought it, unfortunately. Hopefully that answers your question.
لا Yeah, thank you, Melita. Thank you for joining Sana Tanahli. I think we can let you go. You're traveling. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Have a good trip. Okay. شدك عبيتي መሰረት ወይ ከዲ ተሃልዮም አንጽወምሞ ቅድሚኡ ግን ካብ ፅላል ሓውና መርሕ በእተይ ተዳልዩ ነይሩ ተጋጣሚ መልእክተ ስለዝተኸድ ላቀዲምና ስለዚ መእተዊ ስፒች ሓደ 3 ደቂቃ መርሕ ክትጅምር ትፈልካ እስካብ ካልሲ ለምስ ማለት እዩ
اوكي مع الغريب يقدر
لو تسمع الخبر
طبعا غدينا بلد بمجمريا أدمنا أخبركم عن هذا المذكر ساعات شغاي عمل في جماعة مستقبلات استضافنا أكثرهم مسترقبكم مقايشين شمين شم سندات تقارور ناس من حملتنا يروب أنينيا سبب محور السببين ونصر السلم فرسل مرات دائم فرسل مستقبل فرسل لحالة فصلنا كل ما خلطوا أب نبرنا نسأل مدرخ ساعات مثلاً مركوبنا غير الدعلي أبتدي هذا عند الطيران كتران مرجون معرف جراين لو جراين قدام في يروب نعم وزده يروب جلو كأين محرس العالم حول زر مول هذا من قصة برا كمون أغطى قد زي مثلا الزواري أبتدي أرفض أجزاء في دماغ حتى كلهم مصطلح طيب أن تزلوا أفكار وتكافات غير التبصرة بسمشت فاتن قريبهم في غير اليوم أظن لما عندي كلا يسمون مدرسة ما أعرف التعليم سواء كان بدين ميديا كمون سواء سنة أمراوي بسرعة ولولو بعد أبزوا أبديت حسابات فاتن استقرار الاسم بيان أبويم طاعات عند قال استيقظ طاعات كله رتب فمزغني بلد تجارو لتمشي أبزي أبتي جزء سنتطور غرار بدأت السنة سنتطور تجين كان تصاربون تحت حرمنا وتنفر زادير كذا يكونن لازم أصلا هاي مسألة بعد 6 ساعات أرجع للتجارب التعميشية تجارب أحوال الناس أنزلوا في مختلفة مع صراحة أمس حكرا تجاريهم فلا يكون فتاوي كبرى أنا كبرى قبل ذلك كان استيقاظنا واستلزمنا بس نزلوا حاتم دو قبل تدرينا ونستيقظ حتى بر أديت الجائدنا من بعد الفقر حطيت الجائدنا ون أفضلنا كحسن الدفاع سويت الجائدنا أفضلنا دو قبل الدفاع بل كنا غير الوصل أنظر أبدأ الحزبنا زاجت عليه سواء كان يلم بعد تعليم كلها تحكي وراء رسول الحزبنا زيتداني إذا حلف 4 عامات الكرات الثلاثة والطلبات حرموه حقلنا بنروح أصدقاء فيه لشراويان تكارات الميدان بس هو تغيروا التلبيس هاي المكران أقول التشحن سمون تنعمد مرد جميعه أبدأ التجارين أبدأ تجارب التجارين بميديا تجمرة عاتم تسقاوي وراء شعب مستن وليكم وبلاز بصروا حزبنا أصلي تعرف الفكرة كبصراتنا قصنا ميديا طبعات سحلوا فات مثلا تجارب سميديا أكتشفنا نزلنا سلعنا أجندة بسقط لما بتكون أكلت تغفلهم سلعي الزربان يجمعوا أكثر ما تفضلوا لأن فعلهم توالي حزبنا أول أكلت تغفلهم قبل لي فقاموا تصحات قدمنا حضروا ليركم وزن سحلوا القصة جماعة المفتاح كابن كبانا من علي أو قامتنا نقع متحيل كلية ولن وحطاتهم كلهم سلاماتنا حقناتنا لأننا حقن ساعات زلنا حقن أدنى حقن هو اللي ما حد حقن قام زراعة ما تكون ታሪክና ከም ዘርእዮ ሓድነት ተጋሩ ኣብ ፀገማት ምስራባን እስተርናዕ ኣብ ሰላምን ረህዋን ዝብርዕን ዘይውፅኢታዊ እዩ እዚ ኣወለዶ ክየር እዚ ኣብዚ ዝወሎ ክየር ኣለዎ ሓድነትና ውፅኢታዊ ዝኸውን ሓደ ኣብ ዝገብሩና ጉዳያት ከም ሓደ ደው ምባል እዩ ኣብዚ ሕዚ እዋን ኩለና ተጋሩ ካብ ተማዛበረ ህዝብና ናብ መረበቱ ይመለስን ብዛዕባው ሓድነት ትግራይ ከበርን ንላሕ ደው እንገብሩ ኣጀንዳ ትልጡ እዚ ኣጌርና ህዝብናን ትግራይናን እንተዘይትና ባሕ ናይ ታሪክ ሓዳት ካብ ምኳኑ ደይንውዕል ኣብ መወዳእታ ኣብዞም ዝተጠቐሱ ካልኦት ተዘመርቲ ጉዳያት ዝተፈላለዩ ዓውዲ ስራሕ ዝመፁ ኣጋይሽ ሰፊሕ መብራህርህን ሞያዊ ትንተናን ኣቅርቡልና እዮም ብዝኾነ እውን ተነሒስ ውፅኢታዊ ከም ዝኮኑ ተስፋው ክሳብ መወዳእታ ንሕብረትና ሕዝብና ክፀንሑ شمالين سنبات تجارون الناس التي تحدثن يروح أني ناس في المحصول العربي كم ناس في المحصول العربي ده بخطي يعدم بخط ثلاث أنواع دول بل هي الجن غير الصح يعني
لنا مرة يعني لنا تeddy ya day مودهم بس masih ay mutchain
masih ab gurzos lezalas ab qurb زي ودنا تنسل
okay all right
ajallaku
all right okay I can't see
hello ATE maybe Turkish تخاخل نبر ATE
بعد احنا متأخرين مسيح حبسنا
thank you so much
بتعمل كتاخوني وتعنا مجمرة presenter صحيحي
okay
so shared قوي نقدر لي PowerPoint we can make it co-host
دحنا كمبير إخوان مواقفكم أخي ما بيزي خاينا أني لو ما عندنا في حقيقة إلا جانا خزي إلا أتلس مقالة بكم سيب قرار له تعمل بيزي بتاع أي تبيو إلا سي زحمة مادة تثنيرا عني هذه إلا أتيخنا thank you so much بتعمي كرتالي لمخاني أسفاي قبر سنة سرعة طولت نيرو بخاني خاليو خلينو بقضة حاجة جمعي خالي
أوا مسي
بتعمي إذا مسجن عاوزين نزلو تساتافو خلو سلال تقاننا على عبي خبري سمعني من الوقت نزحلفو 4 عامتات أنا كاكش أخذي هزو لحتاج وان كبان زحلفنا يو جزي قليل يكونن نحلفو ذلنا جزي هزون قليل يكونن لذا خمزي تراخيبكا بزعبا للخيو خناتات بزعبا قدأتخا بزعبا عدخا بزعبا مننتخا بزعبا دتاتخا كتوقع عدل مركب مالت بتاع معبي نقري وزي ساعات ذي already خلطة سايد سلالو خانا ايو بزوح كزي تقمنا علي فلت النامبي لموقع على تنفاس أغني خاص لكتوقع عدل مقنايلة بتاع معبي نقرينا وقعقانينا كاللي دل قدمة نزع دزت للحوخو من له هم حنتي أفتو زراسو عسيلة تسرح لأيا إلكم عمينكم اللي بزعبات للكونتات كوقع سلا أجل فدركم اللي بتعمي إلى مسجن مكنياتهم كافتهم مسارحهم سراحتنا تحادة أنا أدفوكيسي سراحت سلا لخونة أدفوكيسي مالت هم تللا مجنا يوم تناخل لك زي أدفوكيسي مقبار تراح لخونة دمتن بزعبال تعفنا نتا تحوات هزاونتي كوقع بزعبالي خيلان نتا تحوات هزاونتي بلازحن قدات مخنيات رأسن لدفعة not only بتلازحن قدات مخنيات بدرجة محورسون تقبلنتنا تخكل سلالي خونا لأتن نهول لنا ترقم تخكل سلالي خونا ساتن كوقع سلالي خيلا ساتن كناقرا سلالي خيلا عندبت سلالي ولن عندبتن بزأل أقل بمحورسة ولن لتخلك لدتات نحوات مناسين سلالي اللونا نا كان دمتي مقان لا أنا هم حدا عاوت يوما زعدل زي سلال تفدر اللي كمسجني فوتو يسمع الخدي أو نتحفتي الخدي
سمع لها مثلا
سمع لها
ماشي thank you so much كاو بتعمي ኣገዲሶሙና ክንሪኦም ዝግበአና ሰለስተ ዓበይቲ ነጥብታት ከልዕሊ ጉድኣትና ክንደየና እዮም ብምንታይ እዩ መጠን ጉድኣቶም ከመይ እዩ ፆታዊ ጥቃዓት ኣብ ትግራይ ዝተፈፀመ ፆታዊ ጥቃዓት እዩ ዝብሉ ነገራት ከልዕሊ ብጣዕሚ ኣገደስቲ ዝኾኑ ነጥብታት እቲ ሓደ እንታይ እዩ ቁዛመ ከም ፀላኢ ኣብ ልዕሊ ኣዴታትና ዝፈጠሮም በደላት ዝፈጠሩ በሰላ ካብ ኣእምሮና ከይወፅእ ተገይሩ ምእንቲ ክንሓምም ምእንቲ ክንቁዝም ኣደይኩ ከምዚ ኮይና እያ ሓፍተይኩ ከምዚ ገይሮሞ እዮም ኣነ እውን እንተኮይነ ጉድእቲ ከምዚኣ እኮ ገይሮምን እዮም ከምዚኣ እኮ ተበዲለ እየ ማሕፀነይ መጫወቲ ገይሮሞ እዮም ክብረይ ክምልስ ኣይክእልን ክብሪ ኣደይ ክምልስ ኣይክእልን ክብሪ ሓፍተይ ኣይተመለሰን ኣብ ማሕፀነ ኣደይ ዓፅሚ ኣቐሚጦም እዮም ኣብ ማሕፀነ ኣደይ ሚስማር ኣቐሚጦም ላማ ኣቐሚጦም ዝሞተ ተበን ኣቐሚጦም እናበልና ናቆዘምና ካብቲ ስቃይ እሱ ከይወፃእና ናበኸና ክንነብር ሓደ ዓብዪ ፕሮፓጋንዳ ተሰሪሑልና እዩ ልዕሊና ኣብ ልዕሊ ስቃይ ፖለቲካ ተሰሪሑ እዩ እቲ ስቃይ በይኑ እኹል ኣይነበረን ንዓኣቶም እቲ ስቃይ ን20 ን30 ዓመት ሰረት ሰሪቱ ነዊሕ ዕድመ ለኣና በተሓሳስባ ፓራላይዝ ክገብር ብትውልዲ ፈራሓት ክንከውን ፀላኢ ክበሃል ከሎ ጊቭ ኣፕ ንገብር ቀልጢፍና ንፈርሕ ቀልጢፍና ኢድና ንህብ ንኸውን ማሕበረሰብ ተገይሩ ብጣዕሚ ናይ ብዙሕ ዓመት ፅንዓት ተኻይድዎ ዝተፈፀመ ፆታዊ ጥቅዓት እዩ ብእሺ ክፅዋዕ ከሎ ኦልሬዲ ፆታዊ ጥቅዓት ስለ ዝበሃል ፆታዊ ጥቅዓት ዝብል ዘለኹ እምበር ኣነ በቲ ፆታዊ ጥቅዓት ዝበሃል ኣፀዋውዓ ተዘይፅዋዑ ደስ መለኒ ውሽ ኣይኩድ ካሊእ ሽም ተዝወሃቦ ከም ተጋሩ እውን ክንህቦ እዩ ዝግበአና ምክንያቱም ኣብ ልዕሊ ሓንቲ ኣደና ሓንቲ ኣብነት ክጠቅስ ኣብ ልዕሊ ሓንቲ ኣደና ዝተፈፀመ መስካሕክሒ ፆታዊ ጥቅዓት ክጠቅስ እሞ ሽሙ ፆታዊ ጥቅዓት ድዩ ካሊእ እዩ ዝበሃል ዝብል ነገር ምእንቲ ክንሪኦ ሓንቲ ኣደ ካብ ከባቢ ምዕራብ ተመዛቢላ ዝመፀት ኣደ እያ ካብ ገዛኣ ትወፅእ ተላ ኣት ቢግኒንግ ካብ ገዛኣ ትወፅእ ተላ ኣብ ውሽጢ ገዛኣ በዓል ገዛኣ ተቐቲሉ በዓል ገዛኣ ትቐተል ተሎ ኣብ ቅድሚ 5 ደቁን ኣብ ቅድሚ በዓልቲ ገዝኡን እዩ ተቐቲሉ በዓል ገዛኣ ምስ ቀተልዋ ኣብቲ ገዛ ዘሎ ንብረት ወርቃን ኣብ ኢዳ ዝነበረት 20 ቅርሽን ይምንጥልዋ መንጢሎም ከይዳ ዓዲ ክውፅኢ ተጋሩ ትሕቲ ተከዘ እምበር ብልዕሊ ተከዘ ዘሎ ግዝኣትኩም ኣይኮነን ካብ ዓድና ደቂ ክሒዝ ክውፅእ ተባሂላ ክትወፅእ ከላካ በሪ ኣፍ ሬሳ ሰብኣይ ተሻጊር ክውፅእ ተባሂላ ሬሳ ሰብኣያ ተሻጊራ እሳን ደቃን ንብረቶም ተመንጢሎም ተመንዚዖም ይወፁ ካብ ገዛ ይወፁ ድሓር ከም ሃገሮም ካብ ተከዘ ተሻጊሮም ኣብ ሓደ ከባቢ ይዕርፍ ብጣዕሚ ከቢድ ኩነታት እዩ ነይሩ ሽዑ በብመንገዱ ድሮን ይትከስ በብመንገዱ ከበድቲ መሳርሕታት ይትኮሱ ሰብ ይሕረድ ሰብ ይቐተል ኣብቲ ከባቢ ሻዕብያ ኣሎ ፋኖ ኣሎ ና ፒፒ ሰራዊት ኣሎ ስለዚ ድሕሪ ዝተወሰነ ጉዕዞ ኣብ ሓደ ከባቢ ትዓርፍ ክትዓርፍ ከላ በኽሪ ወዳ ንድሕሪት ይተርፍ በኽሪ ወዳ ወዲ 18 ዓመት እዩ እሱ እዩ ናይ መጀመርያ ወዳና በኽሪ ወዳ ንድሕሪት ምስ ተረፈ እቶም ካልኦት ቆልዑት ኣብቲ ዘዕረፈ ህዝቢ ሓዲጋ ንድሕሪት ትምለስ ነቲ ወዲ 18 ዓመት ቆልዓ ክትጎትት ማለት እዩ እዚ ዝዝርዝሮ ኣለኹ ናይ ኩለን ደቂ ኣንስትዮ ትግራይ ሳምፕል ስለ ዝኾነ እዩ ጉድኣቱ ክርድአና ስለ ዝግብኦ እዩ ንድሕሪት ክትምለስ ከላ ኣብ ኢዳ ምስኣ ዝነበረ ወዲ 13 ዓመት ህፃን ብታሕቲ ዝወለደቱ ሕሳስ ስለደወዳ ናይ ኣነማ ክኸይድ እየ ምሳኺ በይነይ ክተርፍ ፈቃደኛ ይኮንኩን እቶም ዘለው ድምፅታት እውን ስለዘፍርሕዋ እቶም ዘለው ኩነታት እውን ስለዘፍርሕዎ ዝነበሩ ክኸይድ እየ ምሳኺ ኢሉ ይኸይድ ምስኣ ንድሕሪት ይምለስ ስለዚ በኽሪ ወዳ ንክትእልሽ ሕሳስ ስለደወዳ ሒዛ ንድሕሪት ትምለስ ተላ ናብቲ ጦርነት ዘለዎ ከባቢ ትምለስላ ማለት እዩ ኣብ መንጎ ዘለዋ 3 ደቂ ኣንስትዮ ደቃ ሓዲጋ ሕሳስ ስለደወዳ ሒዛ ንድሕሪት ትምለስ ተላ ብጣዕሚ ብዙሓት ሬሳታት እናተሻገርኩ ብጣዕሚ ብዙሕ ሬሳታት ናኣለሽኹ ዝወደቐ ሬሳ ገፁ ገሊጠ ናርኣኹ ወዲከ ይኹን ኢላ ብጣዕሚ ብዙሕ ምስ ተሻገረት ኣብ ሓደ ገረብ ወዳ ሬሳ ወዳ ትረክብ ተቐቲሉ ትረኽቦ በኽሪ ወዳ ሒዛ ውይ ክትብል ከላ ኣጋጣሚ ናይ ሻዕብያ ሰራዊት ይኣቲ ይመፅዋ እንታይ ትገብር ኣለኺ ኣይ ወደይ ጠፊእኒ ድሕሪ ተመሊሰ ይኸው ሬሳ ወዳ እየ ረኺበ ዘለኹ تاخد كابي خمتيخي كام معرا تاي تجارو متيخي تسديد من سديدك أمحارو ساعة رخي ومن أخم كسددو بعد خدا أمبر ويانا دا أخم كمبر ويانا دا أحبي خوخان كمبر لهم حيزو ما نعا خحزوا خلو سلست يوم تطاوي تقعد كيف تمولا كدالة يخلو تودع 13 عام تودع أوي لهم منقو بدمقات مكناتو حماق نقر ناري مدينيو أو لعدد حماق نقر كمز في التارير اللويو سلازي سوء يغل ببخيات السوء تبل تلو كربشوم فقادن يفتل يخونو أو قدما عينا ناريت ودع 13 عام تودع بتيت يقتلوه ودع 13 عام تودع بتيت قتلهم أمونغو بخرو ودان أمونغو حساس لدودان نايخلت يوم رقا ريسا إيد حيزا لسلسته صوتاوي تقعاتي فتوم الله صوتاوي تقعاتك فتوم الله خلو كخادو خلو أفتخبابي زهادة صدار عزمي العلوم لما حتى أنا أتيوه عن ترجمة تكرويتي بالعلن بتحت نزلو دقخي ودينا يومنا دحرها زون تابز قدسيك تخي تولدي ما هتأنك عزم حديقنا له إنايلو حديقو موا يخدو بلاد زيا لما قالك تحكر مزيا أو هيس أب فيستو الله هوسبيتال يرخيبا يعني كندينا قرياتا من دي لازل نرقر نرى مريتها من النتا عدا تقراوي النتا عبيت الخبابي حدا مع الجزعة بهوت خلتها نبرتها هافتا ورقة ترقة سلسته بخرو ودا 4 حساس لدودا 5 خبرة في الدشتا دعنا نافيس الله تقول دايس خوين أيا 7 እዚኦም ኩሎም ነገራት ፌስ ዝገበረት ኣደ ከም ፅዋዓ ከለና ፆታዊ ጥቅዓት ጉድእቲ ኢና ንፅዋዓ ከም ፀላኢ እዚ ክገብሩ ከለዉ እዚኦም ኩሎም በደላት ቅድሚ ምግባሮም ብሓፂሩ ክቐትልዋ ይኽእሉ ነይሮም እዮም ሓንቲ ጥይት ግን ላበይ ከምፅኡና ይደልዩ ከም ህዝቢ ቁዛመ ናብ ዝብል ነገር መጀመርያ ዘለዓል ክኾኑ ከምፅኡና ይደልዩ ዕድመና ሙሉእና ቆዘምና ዕድመና ሙሉእና በኸና ዕድመና ሙሉእና ሓሰብና ናተበሳጨና ናሓረቕና ክንነብር መንነትና ክንፀልእ ትግራዋይነትና ክንስከፎ ይገብሩ ሓደ ካሊእ ካብ ቁዛማ ሓሊፎም ዝገብርዎም ነገራት ህፃውንቲ ዝባኸነ ኣእምሮ ክህልዮም ዝላሕልሐ መንነት ክህልዮም ብትግራዋይነቶም ክስከፉ ብትግራዋይነቶም ክሓፍሩ ትግራዋይ ክበሃል ከሎ ክድንግፁ መንነትካ መን እዩ ክበሃል ከሎ ካሊእ መንነት ክፅውዑ ምእንቲ ኣብ ቅድሚ ህፃውንቲ ትግራይ ብጣዕሚ ብኣላፍ ዝቁፀሩ ህፃውንቲ ኣብ ቅድሚኦም ኣዲኦም ተደፊራ እያ ኣብ ቅድሚኦም ኣቦኦም ተሰሪዱ እዩ ዝሞት ብጥይት ኣብ ቅድሚኦም ከም እንስሳ ወለዶም ኣሕዋቶም ኣፅቢታቶም ተሓሪዶም እዮም ኣብ ቅድሚ ህፃውንቲ ትግራይ ዘይተገበረ ነገር የለን ኦን ፐርፐስ ረአዩ እናተባሃሉ ረአ ኣደኻ ከምዚ ንገብሩ ኣለና ረአ ኣቦኻ ናሓርዶ ኣለና ትግራዋይ ስለ ዝኾነ ትግራዋይ ኮይንካ ተቐፅልካ እዚኣ ይዓድልካ ይብልዎ ቃል ብቃል ትግራዋይ ኮይና ክቐፅል እየ ትግራዋይ ኮይና ክዓቢ እየ ተልካ እዚኣ ይዓድልካ እናተባሃለ ክንደይ መከራ ዝሓለፉ ካብ 3 ዓመት ጀሚሩ ክሻዕ 17 ዓመት ህፃውንቲ ብጣዕሚ ብዙሕ ግፍዒ ሓሊፎም እዮም ብጣዕሚ ብዙሕ ግፍዒ ሓሊፎም ተሸኪሞም ኣብ ቅድሚኦም ኣዲኦም ተቐቲሉ ኣብ ቅድሚኦም ሓዎም ኣብ ቅድሚኦም ሓፍቶም ኣብ ቅድሚኦም ኣቦኦም ተቐቲሉ መረበቶም መንነቶም ኩሉ ነገሮም ተመንዚኦም ትግራዋይነት መርገም ምዃኑ እናተነገሮም ብጣዕሚ ብዙሕ ችግር ሓሊፎም ከዚ ስቲል ኣብ ኣይዲፒ ተደርብዮም ዘለዉ ህፃውንቲ ብዙሓት እዮም እዚ ከም ትውልዲ ብጣዕሚ ክንሓስበሉ ዝግበአና ሓደ ዓብዪ ኪሳራ እዩ ምክንያቱም እዞም ቆልዑት እዚኦም ስቲል ኩሉ ግዜ ዝዛረብ ነገር እዩ መድረክ ክረክብ ከለኹ ስቲል ክመሃሩ ፈቃደኛታት ይኾኑ ናብ ማሕበረሰብ ክሕወሱ ፈቃደኛታት ይኾኑ ናብ ህዝቢ ክሕወሱ ፈቃደኛታት ይኾኑ ኣይጫወቱ ይኹም ቆልዑት ዲግዲግ ኣይብሉ ምክንያቱም ቶርች ተገይሮም እዮም ኣቦኦም ተቐቲሉ እዩ ንኦም ፆታዊ ዓመት በፂሕዋ እዩ ወይ ሓፍቶም ወይ ሓዎም ተቐቲሉ እዩ ሬሳ ተሻጊሮም መፂኦም እዮም እዞም ህፃውንቲ እዚኦም ሒዝና ኢና ቀፃሊ ትግራይ ቀፃሊ ኣንፈት ትግራይና ኣለና ነውግዕ ኣለና ኣብዞም ህፃውንቲ እዚኦም ዝሰራሕናዮ ነገር የለን ፅባሕ ንግሆ ትውልዲ ዝቕበል ህፃን የብልና ፅባሕ ንግሆ ትግራይ ትበሃል መንነት ዘለዋ ብባዕላ ተኮርዕ ከምቲ ኩሉ ግዜ ንሕና ነኮርዕና ዝመፃና ትግራዋይ እየ ዝብል መንነት ዘኩርዖም ትውልዲ ሒዝና ይኮንና ንቐፅል ዘለና ኣንደርስታንድ እውን ዝገበርናዮ ኣይመስለንን ብዝልክዕ ጉዳትና ሳልሳይ ኦን ፐርፐዝ ዝተሰርሐ ከዝለ ብኣሽሓት ዝቁፀሩ ንምንታይ ከም ዘይውጋዕ ይፈልጥ ግን ብኣማኢት ኣሽሓት ዝቁፀሩ ካብ ፀላኢ ዝተወለዱ ህፃውንቲ እኒአውና እዞም ህፃውንቲ እዚኦም ክውለዱ ከለዉ ኦን ፐርፐዝሊ صنعات تخايدو تنسي كاين تصلا شوعة ورحي 6 ورحي 5 ورحي كالشعب زقبرة بروتكت لا تقبرة لا تحلي أدتاتنا نحواتنا منا أسينا لابنا مريت نابلا إيرترا مريت توسيدن بروتكت تغيرن كتأنسا تغيرو on purpose كتأنسا تغيرو تقراوينات كنت كوئينا درخن كنت كوئينا دمخن كنت كوئينا لا تبهلا أنيسان مخانا مستفلتا لو عدن لمريتن لتسدد أدتات سبع حادر سبع قشتي منا أسي مهورات حاخايم ممهرات أبلي حاسوبو ساعات بلي حاسوبو أخنتات أموترف سقاين أموترف كانزأن ناي حادك يخون ناي 20 ناي 30 ناي 40 5 صوت زرئي كم مني كم استفتر زي فلطو ملكوعم زي فلطوهم ناي سقاين ملكت ناي كانزأن ملكت عدم الملوك سقاين لاستوسا كنبرا بودن بولادن ولادن بزحقفا قطري سقاين كحقفا ولادن بزطويا قطري سقاين كطويا بدلن سقاين ناطويا كنبرا دحر كأت زعبي قلعة 18 عامت كملؤ 18 عامت زملؤ ولاد مننت كطيق كلو ستيل تادك تسقف ود من شكتلو ود سقايي ود زلاي تدفير زولد كخا همز عينت بدل بتحني زولد كخا أبزي خنتات ازي توليدوم زلو قلعوت مقبي نكرخو بروتكشن لكرخو انهم بتعنا التحليت كتخون مقبي كتراكب كتكناخنوم تقراوينتهم امينهم كعاويو تقراوينت بيو لديرا كتعبيهم نا تقراي فقر كهليا أسا نا تقراوينت فقر كهليهم كتقبر صملول بلو هتاونتي لقبرنايا ولا حنت ستيبي اللاي كم تقارو ازيوم أو كم زعينت قدقات زلو قلعوت حيزنا خازي بقت تازرخنا ينعدتات بقت تازرخنا ينحوات تقارو إيهم كاو تقراويتي ما هاتسان سلازي تولدو ناتنا دم سلازلوهم ناتنا زرئي سلازلوهم تقارو إيهم مبزحتيهم بشم تقراي لنا نتوعم مبزحتيهم بشم تقراوي نتزاعم بشم نحبنا نتوعم مبزحتيهم بشم زعابلنا تطبق تسفا زلو شب نحبنا نتوعم دقنا أيوم تقري ولون ودي تلاقي تبريو ودي أكلي تبريو كعب نجيو كطيقن نجيو كحتن نجيو لحركة ودماني خطواهلو ودمانية مستوحالة ها عين تقراوين نتكهليو عاوزي تاي نقبر لنا وصلنا ندحسسو لنا دينا كم منقستي كم محبرسب عاوز قدعات زركوا أديتات قدعاتن سقاين تردينا كندك نحجزن زقبأنا كند تيكير كنقرب ما انت وعدنا مالتي ما انت تقراي ما انت زحاوين تقراي كتلينا ما انت تسفال اللوات تقراي ما انت كتهلينا ما انت دحر 20-30 عامات زمت تولدي زحفة تولد ما انت كخون أقدسنا نسرحلو زلنا قداي يكونن قداينا ون يكونن بمسرته أتمالينا ما أنا ما أتزعت ما أتمي زعت يا حبتي خزي سقايا بعلا كتعجستو مكرلا أتمالي توتالي ما أنا أتم قرط ولا حفتي زت قرط ما أنا كتحكم لعلن تحت انتبه لله أرشو تسينا ما نسألت خد الله أتمالي مسك الحسخي تسالمي اسكي مسك التدحين ككرئية استي متحف قدوس تدحين ككرئية استي بيت أمنات تدحين ككرئية استي مسجد مخانو تدحين ككرئية استي بيت كريستيان بيت مقدس مخانو تأمنوا اللي إخم وتأمين خلوستي تدحينو مخكرئية استي هوزي أتأمني يا مريم يامو تنتصفيا تدحيناتك كنرئينا لا تبهدو مس هايمانوتن لتقرار تاكونا مس أمناتن لتقرار تاكونا مس أمناتن مس هايمانوتن زلنا تنكارب بتختخ مأنتيلو كتهرف عدتاتنا كاب أمنات كنتلون كاب هايمانوت كنتلون كاب بيت كريستيان كنتلون كاب مسجد كنتلون مس هايمانوتنا زتا جبارة بأسي بتعمق لا أطم بدعم إفكتيف نيرو هم تلاقي تسرح زي تسرح وطلو بدعم وتسي إتاو نيرو مقناتهم تمالي مسكال أبيدا حيزة اسكي مسكال تدحينكي كنرئي إنا تواهلا لسالاسا لتدفرت حفتي لو ما عندي مسكال تسالو متيل خيات هاي مالتي مسكال لا عندي إياتو لك تمالي أوشت بيت مقدس وأوشت مسجد استي مناتق تدحينك كنرئي إنا يلوم أوشت بيت مقدس بيت مسجد ጾታዊ ጥቃት ዝፈጸሙላ ሓፍተይ ንዕይ ቤተክርስትያን ሰዓመት ኢልኻያ ንዕበይ መስጊድ ክድተ ኢልኻያ ኣይትሰምዐካይ ምክንያቱም ሃይማኖተይ ድሐነንን ኢላ እያ እዚ ናይ ፀላኢ ስራሕ ውፅኢታዊ እዩ ዘን ኣዴታት እዚአን ላብ ሃይማኖተን ክንመልስ ላብ እምነተን ክንመልስ ላብ ቤተክርስትያን ክንመልስ ላብ ጥንካረአን ክንመልስ በስመኣም ክብላ ላብ ባዕለን ክንምልስ ላብ መንነተን ክንምልስ ዝገበርናዮ ነገር የለይ ብኣንፃሩ ኢና ንኸድ ኣለና ቤተክርስትያን ትኸዳ ከይተነሳኽነይ ተኣትያይ መስቀል ተተሳለማ ክሳለማ ተደልያ መስቀለይ ትሳለሚ ቅድሚ ምስላም ክትነስሒ ላበልና ባዕልና ከም ህዝቢ ከም ማሕበረሰብ ከቢድ ጉድኣት ንፈጥረለን ኣለና ሰበሽቲ ቅሽቲ ተኮይነን ፆታዊ ጥቃት ተበፂሕወን ሓዳረን ይፍታሕ ዋላ ሰበይቲ ቅሺ ኣይትኹን ፆታዊ ጥቃት ተበፂሕዋ ሓዳራ ይፍታሕ ካብ ደቃት ትንፀል ካብ ማሕበረሰብ ትንፀል ካብ ቤተሰብ ትንፀል ካብ ወላዲኣ ትንፀል ስለዚ ክንሰርሖም ዝግበአና ዘይረኣናዮም ብትኩረት ዘይተገንዘብናዮም ብትኩረት ኣጀንዳ ዘይገበርናዮ ቁስልና ብጣዕሚ ሰፊሕ እዩ በደልና ብጣዕሚ ሰፊሕ እዩ ኣብ ሓንቲ ኣዲ ዝበፅሐ በደል ኣብ ብጣዕሚ ብዙሓት ኣዴታት ክበፅሕ ክከፋፈል ዝከኣል ተዝኾን ብደረጃ ትግራይ ስቃይን ኣይምኽኣልናዮ እዩ ግን ኣብዚ ስቃይ እዚ ዘለዎ ኣዴታት ንበይነን ከም ዝተዓደልኦ ንበይነን ከም ዝመፀ ጭራሽ መፀውዒ ሽመን ጌርናዮ ተረፍ ሻዕብያ ናበልና ተረፍ ናይ ፒፒ ሰራዊት እናተባሃላ ካብ ጎረቤት ተነጢለን ካብ ማሕበረሰብ ተነጢለን ካብ ቤተ እምነት ተነጢለን ገፀን ሸፊነን ዘይምሰል መሲለን ደቀን ሕሪሰን ብኺ ዝሓድራ ሰኣን መድሓኒት መዓልታዊ ዝሞታና ብጣዕሚ ብዙሓት እየን ኣብዚኣ ዘለኹም ኣሕዋተይ እንድሕር ተኣምኑኒ ደስ ክብለኒ እዩ ብጣዕሚ ርሑቕ ከይኸድኩም ኣፋእመኑኒ ይስቁልኩም ኣባይ ዘሎ መረዳእታ ብጣዕሚ ዘደንግጥ እዩ ኣብ ቤተሰብኩም ሓንቲ ምህላያ ኣይትተርፍን ኣብ ትግራይ እንድሕር ነርና ኣብ ትግራይ እንድሕር ኣላ ዝሓፍተይ እዚኣ ዛደይ እዚኣ ኣብ ከምዚ ዓይነት ጉድኣት ዘይተሳተፈት ዘይተነኽአት ዘይተበሳበሰት የላን ብውሽጢ ሓቢእናዮ ኢና በደልና ሓቢእና ቁስልና ሓቢእና ክንዛረበሉ ንኽእል ቦታ ንኣለትና ጥራሕ ኢና ንዛረብ ምክንያቱም ተተናጊርካዮ ከም ማሕበረሰብ መግለሊ ኮይኑ ሱቅ ተበልኻለ ስቃሕካ ከቢድ ኮይኑ ስለዚ ትሰምዐሉ ቦታ ትስመዐሉ ቦታ ጥራሕ ንኣለሽካ ዝኽየዳ ትግራይ እያ እኒኣትና ኣብዚ ጉድኣት እዚ ዘለዎ ኣዴታት ኣነ ንባዕለይ ከም ሓንቲ ጉድእቲ እየ ዝሪኣ ኣነ ንባዕለይ ከም ሓንቲ ፆታዊ ጥቃዓት ጉድእቲ እየ ዝሪኣ ምክንያቱም ከም ፀላእ ክመፅእ ከሎ ኦን ፐርፐዝ ናይ ብዙሕ ዓመት ፅንዓት ሒዙ ትመፅእ ተሎ 4-5 ሃገራት ኮይኖም ትመፁ ተሎ ምህላቅ ኣቢናዮም ምውዳእ ኣቢናዮም ሞራልና ምስባር ኣብይዎም ክንወድቕ ኣይከኣልናይ ክንንብርከኽ ኣይከኣልናይ ካብ ባርክኹና ተኮይኖም እታ ትግራዋይነትና ዝሃነፀት እታ ፖለቲካ ተምህረና እታ ሃይማኖት ስርዓትና ተሃንፅ እታ ማሕበራዊ ኩነታትና ተሃንፅ እታ ትምህርቲ ትሰደና ከመይ ክንነብር ንኽእል ትግራዋይነት ተኣዩ ሃይማኖት ተኣዩ ፖለቲክስ ተኣዩ ኤዱኬሽን ተኣዩ ፈልያ ኮንሽስሊ ይኹን አንኮንሽስሊ ተምህረና ኣደና ኣብኣ እዮም ክጫወቱ ደልዮም ንዓኣ ምምካን ኩሉ ነገር ምምካን ምዃኑ እሳቶም ብፅንዓት እዮም መፅዮም እዚኦም ብፅንዓት ክመፁ ከለዉ ኣብ ትግራይ ከም ትግራይ ክትጠፍእ ተኮይና ኣዲኦም ነጥፍእ ኣብ ማህፀኖም ንጫወት ኣብ ማህፀን ኣዲኦም ንጫወት ኢሎም ከም ፀላኢ ስርሖም ብኣግባቡ ሰሪሖም ክኸዱ ከለዉ ኣንሕና ኣብ ቁዛመ ተሪፍና ቁዛመ ሓደ ፓርት ኦፍ ዓላማ እዩ ናቶም ናቆዘምና ናበኸና ክንነብር ቁስልና ክንዲ ክንሕክም ናበኸና ክንነብር ኣደና ክንዲ ንጥብር ኣደና ናወቀስና ክንነብር ሓፍትና ክንዲ ክንጥብር ሓፍትና ተረፍ ሻዕብያ ላበልና ክንነብር ወኣቱም ሰባት ብደረጃ ትግራይ ኣነ ብናይ ኤክስፒሪየንስ ኣነ መንእሰይ ለእየ ዝሓስቦ ንባዕለይ ኣብ ናይ ዕድመ ማህፀን ጓል ኣንስተይቲ ዝቁረፅ ምዃኑ ኣይፈልጥን ነይረ ዝውገድ ምዃኑ ኣይፈልጥን ሰሚዐ እውን ኣይፈልጥን ናይ ማህፀን ምውጋድ ስራሕ ብሕክምና ደረጃ ማህፀን ዝውገድ ምዃኑ ኣይፈልጥን ብደረጃ ትግራይ ክንደይ ኣደታት ክንደይ መናእሰይ እየን ህዚ ማህፀነን ተወጊዱ ካብ ጥቕሚ ወፃኢ ኮይኑ ክንደይ ኣደታት እየን ናብ ፌስቱላ ተጎዳእቲ ኮይነን ፌስቱላ ብጣዕሚ ውሕድ እዩ ነይሩ ኣብ ትግራይ ብትሕቲ ዕድመ መርዓ ምናምን ኣቢሎም ኣብ ወሊድ ምክንያት ምናምን ዝፍጠሩ ጥራሕ ተባሂሎም ናብ ፌስቱላ ጉድኣት ኣዴታት ብቁፅሪ እየን ነይረን ብደረጃ ትግራይ بتعمي لافين خزي أنا كابزلني كاب 5800 زلني صنعات እተን 160 ኣደታት ናፊስቱላን ጉድኣት እየን 15% ካብ ፅንዓተይ HIV ፖዚቲቭ እየን ሓድሽ HIV ፖዚቲቭ ማለት እዩ ካብ ናተይ ፅንዓት ጥራሕ 15% HIV ፖዚቲቭ ተኮይነን ከም ህዝቢ ሃሊቕና ኢና ብጣዕሚ ከቢድ እዩ ማለት እዩ بدرجة تجاي جنا خشع خزيك شعلو معلتي من معينة حكمنا من معينة مرمرة زي تجبر لنا أبديتات بدعم بزوحتين اسم فنانة مخنيات عقمي ولنن economically damaged جين physically damaged جين بدعم بزوح نجر استوجد أبديتاتين حب يرخا أنش خا تدبير خا بيزا خي أمي حفتي نتحكمي نعمل حالة رخوي تزيل كاين لما التي ينزح بقى سلازي كم قدعتنا لك كم سقينا لك كم قصلنا لك أيكوننا نسرح زلنا قدعتنا سفحيو بدلنا سفحيو أو صومون أبزا صومون زيح أكاد أمي أتساوى جيش نيرنا أخيوة حنت صومون تاني حمتي أو حنت صومون أمنو أي تأمنو 160 حدش كيز تاني حني أبيروي 160 كامل لا تقرأي زمتا 160 نايت أوتاوي طلعت قدعات مدحاني زي رخوة حكمنا زي رخوة بيزخم حكمنا كل لازم ندأ ما 160 دتات حدش كيزيل تشكيم تاني حين تتكال which is بدعمي مدنجد إن أنا بدعم محفري جانا كش 4 عامات غيرنا نولنا زحالف جينوسايد منا من نبلنا زحالف إلا نصوع لنا أو كوابيس ألا إذا لو عدتات تطيقوا عدقرات هوسبيتال نمعلتي وين نسوون كنداي صوتاوي تقعت بدأت يقبل this time هذه حدشتي كابزا لامبسا إيريا تلاقي كابزا لو إيريا نمعلتي وين نسوون كنداي صوتاوي تقعت بدأت ليس 15 دقيقة أنستيو يقبل أو صومون أو شران كبابي أنزلوا هوسبيتال أو شرارو سمين معرب كبابي أنزلوا نيتعنا بيروتات كابت ألاقي صوتاوي تقعتنا بتحن هذه حبش زمت حصانتي أدتاتن بالطعمي بزحاتين كائنا نقبر زلنا أبزاو وقعنا زيا أبزاو مومنت زيا أنا سخاتكمي أمني وقعد بساعات كم ديك أنا ستين صوتاوي تقعتنا بتحن زلوا عم إنسلا إذا لو أديتات اللوانا روحت اللوانا ملا أسي اللوانا سلازي ودعتنا قنا يقتل زلوا بدلنا قنا إلي قتل زلوا أبديتات تجراي أيكونن بتلاقي خزي تتعتت اللخو أقبل فرحي هم يحمل النور بدرجة تجراي لنا فرحي هم يتعزوا وهم للخو أبجزنا نحرد لنا أبي تكرستان تقري قتل الله صوتاوي طقعت نشم وانت تفتسمو يا عبك تمام قالنا حد تقول نستيتي شم وانت من أسي حواتنا ندفر لنا بحواتنا نقتل لنا مكنياتهم تتفتمنا بتعمي مسكحك عالم كدنقص زخئل بدل كم بدل قصيرنا قوي عيبلنا لون كم هزي ستيلي قتل له هذه بحواتنا بدي بصوتنا يقتل له تقول سلازي ميبي نتملسكو كواقع خاليا نحر بزح كي حواوس كازن اللي توقعه thank you so much نذهبكم من عدلك نشتي سمعتها لكم كي خد thank you so much
يا أنا بس وي أوتو بدلنا يزرزر تطايرس عمتاتهم لو دا هون نسوي نمو كنا أنيلنا يوتو تخافتنا البروجرام limited time سلقنا ويبي قارس لنا قلنا يمكن تبدل زس يو لزمانات لتنح يمكن قبل كثير وسلمو سلت صرف بالإسراء دعني أنيلنا كمان حاولنا يا كلنا ون أفتح مسك صرف لنا ونعطو كنت حتى أنيلنا سلمنا تخلي لكن
ምጽአተ ጽዮን ትመግንሒ ዜማ ጽዮን በገናኺ ኣውታሩ በጢሶም መእሰሪ ወድኺ ገይረሞ ከብክዑ ود خستمعات كل غيريو أبقريا تدخي دا ستحو مروح خي وقعو لو ما يقلنا يلوم لعدم سويو فنادخي سلاتخي أو حمد دبيو سيون ملغتخي تمخبري نكسي أفمزو انكعهم كي أغلاتهم سي منتلو منبعو أفتكني ماليت حبركا لقطلعو أو عودة مرتخي مقدس فيك بلعو هزاو تراقعو حنتي حرق مستير كي تحدر خبيرا حنتي فراموا كي تقلنا بخرا سيون الحدار غي أبزي حقي مدنقواي أو حقي سريفهم حدق الغي حقاي اتونا خوينا مدري بعودوس على عالتا تبكي تعالو واقو زوين ودحو مديو سلام خوينا قدري بابس خوك أنا لاهي يقزيوتا أراراي لازمو سوار ملغتي بتاسي بقناي فردشا الغمو لغونا خوينما عفتا مساتغي حدرغي سيون لأخوانا ماي كراح دمولو ديوا كيتساتي جيون نغني لك
أتصل لنا program تدرس سكاي مثلا نيو لما عندي ناي ميديا عاملين hate speech سبيدا مقبرة رأس كارول ناي تيدي welcome قاعد احنا متأخر from
يغني اللي يسمعهم
أول تسمع الحبيب
الشيء نقولكم كما سكن اللي تستخدم جينوسايد مذكر ترخبكم كلكم أنا خمسي تأكدنا بساعة اللبس حبر كنا نقاقر موزي من قدسات كان حسب تلخون نقر تلي فلتنا لابت الغصل بلان كان قبر سالين خلال خمسي عينة مدرخ دلاخم تعملي كتمسكنوا يقبع بحالة يمكن مخناتو زي بدرجة ኣብ ትግራይ ብዓለም ለኸ ደረጃ ክግበር ልግብኡልና ረና ገሪቡ እቲ ናይ ትግራይ ምምሕዳር ወይ እቲ ናይ ውሽጢ ትግራይ ዘሎ ፖለቲካ ብጣዕሚ ዝሓመቐ ምዃኑ ካብ እንሪእየሉ ሓደ መንገዲ እዚ ታሕቲኡ ማለት እቲ ዋና ነገር ዝተፈፀመ ግፍዕሲ ልዕልካ ንምንግጋር ዝፍጠሩ ዕድላት ኩሎም ዕድል ተተባሂሉ ማለት እዩና ኣብ ምጥቃም ብጣዕሚ ሓደ ነገር ይልግበርና ትልተዋሃቡ ትኩረት እውን እዚ ሓደ መርኣያ እዩ ብጣዕሚ ዝወሓደ ምዃኑ ስለዚ ከምዚ ዓይነት መድረኻት ምህላዎም ይሕግዝ እዩ ዋላ ቀፂሉ ለልዕሉ እቲ ናይ ናረቲቭ ጉዳይ ኩሉ ምስኡ ዝተሓዚ በደልካ ምንጋር ፓርት ኦፍ ሴቲንግ ናረቲቭ تلتفت مسألة جيرو أفضل كركب بو مسألة نيشابات فلتفتن أرايا كأنا منتي تقولوا قد عم تركيزينا نزلوا إن على لنا قبل من قد ترينا يستشجر خليني أخواني كما سكنت للدرجة أخوي صوتو أنا نقرأ للدرجة يفتحيو hate speech way يعني هيت سبيتش ኣብ ሚድያ ብኸመይ እዩ ይስርሐሉ ነይሩ እንታይ እዩ ኢምፓክቱ ነይሩ ብኣና ወገን ከታይ ክንገብር ይግባአና ነይሩ እንታይ እዩ ዘይገበርናዮ ልኡ ንምክልኻል ዋላ ከልሳ ኢና ንገብር ዘለና ጉዳያት የከልአል ልዳሊ መጀመርያ ሓደ ኣባና ብዙሕ ለይርአ ወር ተፈጢሩ ለይርኦ ግንዛበ እንታይ እዩ ሚድያ ሓደ እትለሉ ኩነታት ብካሊእ መንገዲ ክርአ ናይ ምግባር ሓይሊ ከም ዘለዎ ብዙሕ ንርዳእ ካልኣይቲ ሚድያ ናይ ባዕሉ ሓድሽ ሶሻል ሪያሊቲ ከም ዝፈጥር እውን ብዙሕ ኣይንርድኦ ኣብቲ ናይ ትግራይ ናይ ፖለቲካ ምንቅስቃስ ናይቲ ሚድያን ናይ ናረቲቭን ኣድላይነት ብምልከት ዘሎ ተዕሽሙ ዘሎ ኣረዳድኣ ብጣዕሚ ውሕድ እዩ ስብኡ ምክንያት ከም ኔሽን ኣዘ ኔሽን ንክንነብር ህዝብና ውሕስ ክኾን ለድዩ ዝበሃሉ ብጣዕሚ ዓበይቲ ነገራት እኒኡ ኣብ ብዙሓት ወዲቕና ኢና ኦፍኮርስ ግን بالخفاء من قد لو رأنا حدا نقر إلى الحسوة على ميديان وعنا بالملكات لنقرنا يسلعات نقرات وإناي سقلي نقرات أما كل خالن على بزمتو من قد تنارتي من معررين بحرت أوف لا يحبرت سب خلص لا مقبار صراح مخانو يتردعنا يي سلازي سوزح بزح ساقا ممسي بحلا عم بزح ساقا ممسي بسونا ميديا رول ولا لا وشتي أو وشت بوليتيكال اللو رول بزح تقبلنا تيولي ميديا ميجافون يلرا ميجافون اللي حرخوينو خال خونو سوات ما يكلا لعلو لناقرولو سوات لسوعلو أخيبا لسوعلو لخونا من اختلام حلال فلون بي حسابات اللي بلع لعلو التفلالي حسابات تسعاريهم تشالنج تقيرهم ببزح من قدي حبرتسب حساب الخيل بقول كسر درجة أيوه في كورس كن بقول كسر درجة تحسوا حسابات لا تتقللوا لا تسعريوا صاريهم تسحيلهم موسيقى مالت معبيلهم موسيقى مش حبرتسب اللي طعموا كونوا الخيل حدا ميديا ينيرونا أو بتاع خير جرنا يعني سو تعينيرو تخدموا قلنا رخونا تعات الحريرنا عبيتي بحاول ديسكورس بخلتها مخنات تجارو أن تقرأي جينوسايد مخفص كلهم زدفعوا نجارات نيرهم بعبيت ترينا حدا خلنا مخازن إثيوبيا للتفترة شجر أو تي أما خلنا له إليت عبيتي بقى للتفترة شجر وقند مخنياته زي ناس التانتنا حنحي أو على عينة تعيش بحيز له مثلا الحلف 5 عامات ستمروا عايز بالحلف 5 عامات رح يكون اسقط ميون نايتيبيا نيشن بيلدينج حد شجر تغيرو ديفاين تغيرو مخانو أوقات دحركم الله شوية جن على نوم بالتفلالي وريوت على ما مخنياتات تشالنج يقرنا يزي نايتيبيا تاريخ بخالوت توسيدو ملو نايتيبيا سرحيت بالخون الحبرتسب بالخون اللي تفسمت راح تغيرو نايتيبيا رول بتعم وحد كبرتلو مخنيات نيروي أو تغيرو بوليتيكا أوكي إحنا تمالي أب إثيوبيا تجاكم عينا نيرنا therefore ولا تزبركتنا ينقر توصلوا basically الناس الجمهورية تعلم سازخيد بزح دريولي للحينات consensus لغير يمثل كنت تقرأي نرى contribution تقرأي نرى تاريخ حاجة استواز وكله إنها تدمسسة تهيي قبر حمللو بزح رديتين غير بحرايا سلسي أو لقرنا ينقر حديثو تمالي إنها تطرحها نتقرأي خد فلا أم مقبار نسقبر سرح دارجة سوينا ينارينايو كاب تقرأي وجن إنها تقرأي contribution بتخكل لقلسو أو تقرأي بلاي تقرأي تباكت مخالتي نيرها سو تحرز سقاطو مني أتولو وإيتي بياكواس لحلوت بتقرأي مخنياتي يلو ككرا خلل للسب زي سبيويو قزعنا تو حالي تقانا لقبر نيرو بوغن تيرسل لرابوليتيكا حيلو بحالايا أنا قال أب إثيوبيا أو زي شعوب لفتروا إنه شجرات خلوا scapegoat أو مسواتي بقى تغيير خدمة كم سف خلا نقدر تغييرين زي بخلت وجناتي البرنير ميديا أي بخلو بخلت 3 وجناتي البرنير حدا تمالي بنايتيبيا بوليتيكا رول نيرو ميو ناب بحيلتها تقرأي مخنياتي ترولي تقنسو إلو الأمن ناي مأخل سلاش نايم حرائي اللي تبحاليو تخال أي بتعم تقرم نقريو كاب بقالسة تقرأي مخنيات دارجة 500 عامة قالسهم بقدمي تكسبهم تقرأ نقرقن ببزحي بتي ناي فيدريشن أو غاقرا مخنيات بزح حزبينا بزحاتنا خمتنا وردنا صفحاتنا عوي إيو سلزي تلقى أن مسألة سلطانية ركبنا يلوم لعامنه جن كابتي التقرأي أور بحوحة استمرها قالسي بروح تطقمه قدميو أبنى إثيوبيا تاريخ لينا رأى أوروميا لبحال ميديا كل الستراكشر أرسل منقستي بيت مخرو كلنا كله رسيوه ممكن لولا سأل بمدرسة يوم مخنيات ولا بأوروميا ولا بخلوط بوتاتات للفدس ومشكرات كله مخنياته كاف تقرأي الموسو حيل تاتي يوم إلوم موليسوم لتي قالسوم 500 عامة مقدمة كثير لغير حيلي تقد كلولو لنا أكايداي تقرأي وقنون زي لقبا تنز ولا كابتي ማእከል ፕላስ ኣምሓራ ሓይሊ ንመፅእ ታይፍሙን ብቁዕ መልሲ ተዋሃቦ ፕላስ ካብቲ ናይቲ ሲስተም ዋና ዓብዪ ተጠቃሚ ካብ ዝበሃል ኢሊት ኣብ ልዕሊ ትግራይ ዝፍፀም ጠቕኒ እውን መልሲ ተዋሃቦ ሳልሳይ ብምትግራይ ምክንያት ትግራይ ኣብቲ ናይ ማእከል ዓዲ ፖለቲካዊ ዝነበራ ፅልዋ ምክንያት ሃገር ምኳን ብቀሊሉ ዝተሳካሎ ነገር ግን ቀዲሙ ናይ ኢኮኖሚክ ፕላኖም ኢንታይርሊ ንምስራት ኣብ ናይ ኢትዮጵያ ሪሶርስ ምጉሕጓሕ እዩ ኢሎም ዝኣመኑ ትግራይ ድሕሪ ገዛና እዩ our backyard ኢሎም ዝኣመኑ ናይ ሻዕብያ ፕላስ ናይ ኤርትራ ብሄረተኝነት ሓይልታት እዚኦም ብዝተፈላለየ ምክንያት ብዝተፈላለየ መንቀዲ ኣብ ልዕሊ ትግራይ ጀኖሳይድ ዝካየድ ብዙሕ ጎስጓስ ይገብሩ ነይሮም እዮም ብሚድያ ሶ ኣብዚኣ ሓደ ነገር ንርአ ሓደ እዞም ሰባት ዝተረድኡ ሕማል የተረዳእናዮ ነገር እንታይ እዩ ብሚድያ ሓድሽ ሶሻል ሪያሊቲ ኮንስትራክት ክግበር ከም ዝኽእል ተረዲኦም ኣለዉ ሳቶም ብሚድያ ሽምባይዶ ሓቂ ዘይኮነ ነገር እኳስ ሓቂ ጌርካ ኣዘን ኦብጀክቲቭ ሪያሊቲ ክቁፀር ምግባር ከም ዝከኣል ተረዲኦም እዮም ንሕና ሚድያ እሱ ዓይነት ሮል ከም ዘለዎ የተረዳእና እዩ ሚድያ ኣድላይ ናይ ሕብረተሰብ ናይ ሰርቫይቫል ሜካኒዝም ምኳኑ ብስሩ የተረዳእና እዩ ስለዚ ኣብ ትግራይ ካብ እንትርፎ ናይ ህወሓትን መንግስትን ዝሓልዎ ዕንጨይቲ ዝብል ፕሮፓጋንዳ ዝንገረለን ዓይነት ሚድያታት ጥራሕ ንሳተን ሚድያ ይኮና ብተደጋጋሚ እየተናገራ እዚአን ሚድያ ይኮና እዚአን ዋላ ወይ ፕሬዚደንት ፅሕፈት ቤት ወይ ቤት ፅሕፈት ህወሓት ዝተቐመጠ ማይክ ለልዕሉ ሰባት ዝናገሩለን ናይ ፒአር ኒውስ ዝሰርሓ ምስ ህዝቢ ስቃይ ህዝቢ ምስ መረረት ህዝቢ ምንም ዓይነት ርክብ ዘይነበረን ሽምባይዶ ካብ ደገ ዝመፅእ ናይ ናሬቲቭ ጥቅዓት ካብ ኣብ ውሽጢ ዘሎ ፕሮግራም እኳስ ምስ መንግስቲ ህዝቢ ክራኸብ ዝኽእል ድልድል ኮይነን ክሳርሓ ክእለትን ተበግሶን ዘይነበረን ሚድያታት እዮም ስለዚ ሽምባይዶ ኣብ ደገ ዘሎ ናሬቲቭ ምስትክሳል እቲ ትግራይ ውሽጢ ዝነበረ ፀገም እውን ኣብ ኣርቲኩሌተር ምግባር ምንም ዓይነት ሮል የተጫወተ ኣይክእል ይደፍር ስለዚ ሓደ ዘለና ፈላላይ ምስቶም ጀኖሳይድ ዝፈፀሙ ናይ ጀኖሳይድ ኣክሲስ ሓይልታት ናይ ሚድያ ረብሓ እንታይ ምኳኑ ብግባእ ምርድኦም እዩ ኣብ ትግራይ ሚድያ ዝካየድ ሕዚ እውን ስቲል እቲ ስታሊኒስት ኦር ናይ ኮሚኒስት ዓይነት ሚድያ ሓደ ነገር ደጋጊምካ ብምባል ዋላ ኣርተ እያሃለዎ ዋላ ሓቂ እያሃለዎ ዋላ ደሊቨሪኡ ሕማቅ ይኹን ዋላ ቴክኒካሊ ሕማቅ ይኹን ተቀራረብኡ ግን ተደጋጊሙ ተባሂሉስ ይሰርስ እዩ ዝብል ዓይነት ኣረዳድኣ እዩ ብጣዕሚ ድሑር ዝበሃል ኣረዳድኣ እዩ ባይ ዘ ወይ ኤንድ ብዙሕ ዋጋ ኣኽፊሉና እዩ ካልኣይ ኣፈላላይ ናይ ዘሪሉ ኣነ ንሳቶም ዝሰርሕዎ ይፈልጡ እዮም ኣት ኤንድ ኦፍ ዘ ደይ ናይ ሚድያ ኮሊሽን ጀኖሳይድ ፒኩ ጀኖሳይድ ከም ዝኾነ ከሳክዕዎ ዝደልዩ ነገራት ጀኖሳይድ ምፍፃም ምዃኑ ይፈልጡ ነይሮም እዮም ብዋና ግን ድማ እቲ ሚድያ ብኡ መንገዲ ዝሰርሐሉ ዘሎ ምክንያት እንታይ እዩ ዝብል ነገር ኮፍ ኢልና ኮንቴምፕሌት ክንገብሮ ይኽኣልና ስትራቴጃይዝ ክንገብሮ ይኽኣልና ብስሩቱ ትለሎ ሓደጋ ክንርድኦ ይኽኣልና ሓንቲ ኣብነት ክጠቅስ ኣብዚኣ ቅድሚ ትውግእ ያው ፖለቲካሊ ብዙሕ ኣፈላላይ ክህልወና ይኽእል እዩ ምስ ዝተፈላለዩ ሰባት ኣብ ትግራይ ከም ካልእ ሕብረተሰብ ኩሉ ዝተፈላለዩ ተሓሳስባታት ክህሉ ተፈጥሯዊ እዩ ግድን እውን እዩ ባይ ዘ ወይ እና ምስ ሓደ ያው ትፈልጥዎ ኢኹም ኣነ ምስቲ ሕገ መንግስቲ ብዙሕ ፀገም ኣለኒ ኢለ ተናጊረ እየ እና ይረአየካ ዶ ኢለዮ ቅድሚ ትውግእ ምምፅኡ ሸውዓተ ወርሒ ኣቐዲሙ እዩ እቲ ትራጀክተሪ ትሪኦ ኣለካ ዶ ባይ ዘ ወይ ትግራይ ዘሎ ፖለቲካ ንባዕሉ ኣጀስት ይገብር እዩ ዘሎ እቲ ዝካየድ ዘሎ ፀለማ ኣብቲ ዝኸፍአ ደረጃ በፅሑ ኣሎ እቶም ሓይልታት ኣብ ልዕሊ ትግራይ ክወፍሩ ዝደልዮም ሓይልታት ኣኻፊቦም ኣለዉ ተደድልዮም ስቴፕ ባይ ስቴፕ ይሰርሕዎ ኣለዉ ናይ ሚድያ ናሬቲቭ ሶ ጀኖሳይድ ክፍፀም ዝኽእለሉ ዕድል እኒኦ እዩ ይረአየካ ዶ ኢለ እዩ ዋይ እንታይ ኢኻ ትብለካ ስኻ ባይ ስልካ ኢኻ ሽግር ክትሓስብ ኢኻ ትውዕል ፀገም ክትፈትል ኢኻ ትውዕል እንታይ ኮይኑ እዩ በቃ ማለት ዳርጋ ጥዕናኻ ተመርመር ክብለኒ እዩ እና ብጣዕሚ ምስቲ ኩነታት ናይ ትግራይ ፖለቲካ ምስቲ ሪያሊቲ ዝተፋትሐ እዩ ነይሩ ክብል ይኽእል ስለዚ ብክልተ መቂልና ንሪኦ ሓደ ካብ ማይኖሪቲ ዝመፅእ ሓይሊ ስልጣን ሒዙ ሓምድላ ይገብርሉ ዝብል ዓይነት ናሬቲቭ ዝተበልበለሉ ናይ 27 ዓመት ዝብልዎ ሳቶም ዓመት እዩ ሓደ እሱ ከምትብሎ ንኽዎ ብናይ ኣምሓራ ሚድያ ብናይ ማእከል ኢትዮጵያ ዝበሃል ኢትዮጵያ ባህላዊ ሚድያ እቲ ናይ ኦሮሚያ ናይ ኦሮሞ ብሔረተኝነት ሚድያ and ናይ ኤርትራ ብሔረተኝነት ሚድያ ብሓባር ዝግበር እዩ እዚ እንታይ ማለት እዩ ናይ ኤርትራ ብሔረተኝነት ሰፖርት ዝገብሮ በቲ ናይ ኣምሓራ ኢሊትን በቲ ናይ ኤርትራ ብሔረተኝነት ዝዝገፍ ዝነበረ ጨንፈር ሚድያ ኢሳት እዩ በቲ ናይ ኦሮሞ ብሔረተኝነትን ካልኦት ተዛመድቲ ሓይልታት ዝድገፍ OMN እዩ as a symbol የለልዕሎም ዘለኹ and ኣብ ማእኸል ምስኦም ዝጫወቱ ዝተፈላለዩ ሓይልታት ኩሉ ሓቢሮም ዝሰርሕዎ ናረቲቭ so ኣብ ትግራይ አይዲዮሎጂካሊ ምስ ናይ ኦሮሞ ብሔረተኝነት ክንሓበር ንኽእል ኢና ዝብል ዓይነት ብጣዕሚ ዝተጋገየ ኣረኣእያ ከም ዘሎ ይፈልጥ እየ ብአይዲዮሎጂ ደረጃ ብቋንቋን ብዝፀንሐ ዲኔጅ ምክንያት ምስ ናይ ኤርትራ ብሔረተኝነት ክንሓበር ንኽእል ኢና ዝብል ዓይነት ኣረኣእያ ብካሊእ ወገን እውን ኣሎ ኣብ ትግራይ ፖለቲካ ብጣዕሚ ዝሕዝን ናይ ሓረድ ማለት እዚ ዶ ይሕሽ ካብ ሓረድ እቲ እዩ ዝምረፅ ናይ ባዕልካ መንገዲ ብናይ ባዕልካ እግሪ ተጠቂልካ ብናይ ባዕልካ ርእሲ ትቁፀረሉ ፖለቲካ ዘይኮነሲ እዚ ዶ ይሕሽ እዚ ተባሂሎም ዝቐርቡ መማረፅታት ንሪኢኹምዎ ናይ ሓረድ ትምርጫ እዩ ዝተፈላለዩ መንገድታት ኣርእዮም እዮም ማኒፌስት ገይሮም እዮም በቲ ክገብርዎ ዝደልዩ ነገራት ብቃል ብተግባር ብኩሉ ኩሉስ ተገይሩ እዩ ስለዚ እሱ እዩ ካልኣይ ዓብይ ምስ መፀ ዝነበረ ዓይነት ኣካይዳ ናቱ መቐፅልታ እዩ ግን ብደንቢ ክራፍትድ ዝኮነ ነገር እዩ ተሰሪሑ ባይዘ ክራፍትድ ዝኮነ ነገር እዩ ተሰሪሑ ማለት መጀመርያ እንታይ እዩ ተገይሩ ኣብ ዝተፈላለዩ ከባቢታት ዝደሎ ሽግራት ኩሎም ተሓታቲ ካብ ትግራይ ለመስርሕ ሓይሊ እዩ ናሬቲቭ ተሰሪሑ ምስኡ ኣብ ኣዲሙ ክሰርሕ ዝፀንሐ ነገር ነይሩ እዩ ዝኾነ ይኹን ሰብ ካብ ትግራይ ድሕሪ መፅኡ ዝደለየ ዓይነት ኣረኣእያ ሃልዮ ግን ምስቲ ፓርቲ ዝተተኣሳሰረ እዩ ዝኾነ ተሓሳሰባ ምስ ዝኾነ ህዝቢ ሙሉእ ብሙሉእ ክተኣሳሰር ተገይሩ እዩ በቃ እዚ ኢፌክቲቭ እዩ ምክንያቱ ካውንተር ዝገብሮ ዝኾነ ይኹን ዓይነት ፃዕሪ ስለዝነበረ ብወገን ኣብ ትግራይ ኮነ ኣብ ኢትዮጵያ ኣብ ስልጣን ዝነበረ ፖለቲካ ሕሊ እውን እዚ ሓደጋ ሪኮግናይዝ ይግበር ስለዘይነበረ ብስሩ ቻሌንጅ ዝገብሮ እዩ ነበረ ካውንተር ዌይት የነበሮ እዩ ስለዚ ሓምድላይ እዩ ተሰቢኹ ኣብ ኢትዮጵያ ንትግራዋይ and ሕወሓት ብፍላይ ኤኒ ትግራይ ሪሌትድ ዝኾነ ምንቅስቃስ ኣብ ኣደባባይ ወፂኻ ምቅዋም ሃይ ሪዎርዲንግ ዜሮ ሪስክ ዝኾነ ቢዝነስ እዩ ነይሩ ብመሰረቱ ድሓር ኣበይ ብኡ እዩ ቀፂልዎ መጀመርያ እንታይ እዩ ገይሩ ኣብ ኢትዮጵያ ዝፍጠሩ ሽግራት ኩሎም ካብ ሕወሓትን ካብ ትግራይን እዮም ዝፍልፍሉ ዝብል ዓይነት ኣረኣእያ ክሰፊሕ እዩ ተሰሪሑ እተን ዓንቱ ዝጠቐስዎን 3-4 ሓይልታት ኦልሬዲ ኣብ ዝተበታተነ ኣብ መንጎኦም ሕወሓት ኣብ ኣዲስ ኣበባ ስለዝነበረ ክሳዕ ዘይከኣለ ነገር ሕወሓት ናብ መቐለ ሪትሪት ብምግባሩ ምክንያት ዝተፈጠረ ኮንቨርጀንስ እዮም ንኣብሶሉት ኮንቨርጀንስ ማለት ብዝተፈላለየ ምክንያት ዋላ ይኹን ግን በብወገኖም ኣንፃር ትግራይ ምንቀሳቀሱ ዝነበሩ ሓይልታት ኣብ ኣዲስ ኣበባ ብስልጣን እዮም ተራኺቦም ስለዚ ምስቲ ቅድሚኡ ዝነበረ ኦልሬዲ ዝተደልደለ ኩነታት ይምቹ እዩ ነይሩ በቃ ማለት ኣብ ኢትዮጵያ ዝፍጠሩ ሽግራት ኩሎም መንቀሊኦም ትግራይ እያ ዝብል ዓይነት ናሬቲቭ ሰፊሑ እዩ ብድሕሪኡ እንታይ ተገይሩ ትግራይ ወታደራዊ ምድላው ተገብር ኣላ 1 ሚልዮን ዝኾኑ ሚሊሻ ሰልጢኑ እዩ ትልነበረ ትፅልእዎ ተገላገልኽዎ ዓይነት ገዛዛ መሊሱ ክመፅእ ምድላው ይግበረሉ እዩ ዝብል ዓይነት ነገር ተላዒሉ እዚኣ ስፔሲፊካሊቲ ብድሓር ብዝገበርክዎ ብፅራይ ዝፈለጥክዎ ነገር ኣበባው ታደሰ እዚ ናይ ፒፒ ጀነራል እዩ ሽዑ ምስ ብልፅግና ሓምለይ ነበረ ተገይሩ ኢሉ ቁፀር ነይሩ ኣበይ ምስ ኣበባው ታደሰ ተራኺቡ እዛ ናሬቲቭ እዚኣ ክፈጥራ ብ360 እዩ ኩሉ እቲ መልእኽቲ ረዳእታታት ኣብ ትግራይ እንደ ብርጌድ ታንከኛ ብርጌድ ክንዲዚ ሚሊሻ ክንዲዚ ወታደር ክንዲዚ እንታይ ሽሙ በቃ ብዳርጋ ብቁመትን ወርድን መከላከያ ዝኾነ ሓይሊ ይዳለሉ እዩ ዝብል ዓይነት ናሬቲቭ እዩ ተጀሚሩ ቅድሚኡ እዛ ናሬቲቭ ሳ ይዝክሮ አንዳርጋቸው ፅጌ ብዶቼ ቬለ ቪድዮ እዩ ጀሚርዎ ባይዘወይ ኣብ ትግራይ ዓብይ ሰራዊት ምድላው ይግበረሉ እዩ ዝብል ዓይነት እዚኣ ድሕሪ ትውግእ ተኻይዱ and really ሃምቲ ዝተባሃለ ትግራይ ምድላው ድሕሪ ተገይሩ እሞ ድሕሪ ከቢሉ ዋና ጌርናኩም ጌርና ኮይና ብዙሕ ምድላው እኮ ተገይሩ እዩ 1 ሚልዮን ሚሊሻ 1 ሚልዮን ሰራዊት ኣብ ተዳለወሉ ኩነት እንታይ ክንገብር ንኽእል ክበሃል እዩ ድሕሪ ተሳኺዑ ከዓ እንደዚህ ምድላው ተገይሩ እኳ ደምሲስናዮ ዓቕምና ርኢና ልብል ዓይነት ዕላማ ዝነብሮ እዩ እቲ ካልኣይ መጀመርያ እንታይ ተፈጢሩ ፕሮብለም reaction solution you formula anyway so بدحيو قص بقص اوكي اذا سراويت زمدلاو زي بتقمي يقفل ስለሆነ ኤርትራና ካልኦትን ሓገዝ የድልየና እዩ ዓይነት ናረቲቭ ብሚድያ እዩ ተሰሪፉ ናይ ሻዕብያ ሰራዊት ኣብ ትግራይ ኣትዩ ወራር ክፍፅም ቅድሚ ሻዕብያ ምእታዊ እዩ ፃውዒት ይግበር ነይሩ እዚ ክራፍትድ እዩ በባና ወገን ግን ሓደ እቲ ሚድያ ድላይነቱ የተረዳናዮ ዘለኹ እቲ ካልኣይ ትፅላኣት ኣበይ ጠርዚ ከም ዝበፅሐ ሱሩስ ኣዌርነስ የናር ኣዌርነስ ዘይነበረ ኣብቲ ህዝቢ ጥራሕ ይኮነ እዩ ኣብቲ ዋና ስልጣን ሒዙ ዝፀንሐ ኦር ኢንፍሉንስ ዝገብር ዝፀንሐ ፖለቲካዊ ሓይሊ እውን እዩ ባይኑ ሓንቲ ጋዜጠኛ ቅድሚ 2000 ቅድሚ ትውግእ ምጅማሩ ብ2019 ኣብ ትግራይ ከይዳ ነይራ እና ኣብ ዝተፈላለዩ ቦታታት ተንቀሳቂሳ ህዝቢ ሪኣቶ ተወዲ ሰባት ዝረአየቱ ናይ ፅላኣት ስምዒት ተወዲ ሰባት ዝረአየቱ ብጣዕሚ ሓደገኛ ኩነታት ምስቲ ኣብ ትግራይ ዝነበረ ኩነታት ብፍፁም ክተዓመላ ይኽእል ናብ ብጣዕሚ ተረቢሻ ነይራ እና ኣብ ሓደ መንደር ገፀር እዩ ኣትያ ስዋ ዝሽየጠሉ ሰባት ኮፍ ኢሎም ዝጫወትሉ ቦታ እዩ እና ሓንቲ ዕድመ ድፍእ ዝበላስ ሰበይቲ እየን ኣዶ እየን ጠይቃተን ሻዕብያ ከምዚ እኮ ይዳለሎ እዩ ሻዕብያ ከምዚ ክገብር ይበሃል ዶ እዩ ሰው ኣይትፈርሑ ዲኹም ኣይትፈርሐን ዲኽን ኢላ ስትድዮ እንታይ ክትብለኽ ሓፍተይ መከላከያ ላይ ከይዲ እዩ ህዝቢ ኢትዮጵያ ስኢሉ ዶ ይርአየና እዩ ከምዚ ሻዕብያ ገይሩና እዚ ስኢሉ ክልብዓት ከይተጨንቕ እየን ኢለና ሰን ኣዶ እየን እምነት ክሓድረን ኣይ ቲንክ ክፍረደን ይኽእል ግን ቃል በቃል እዚኣ ቃል ነገር ክኾዝ ቃል በቃል መን ክብላ ትሰምዑ ብ2009 ኣቦይ ስብሓት ቃል በቃል ሻዕብያ እንድሕር ወሪሩና ህዝቢ ኢትዮጵያ ሱቀ ይብሉ ሻዕብያ እንድሕር ወሪሩና መከላከያ ሱቀ ይብሉ ኢሎም እዮም ብወገን ትግራይ እንታይ ይስራሕ ካብ ዝነበረ ብፍፁም ኣዌርነስ የነበረ ኣዌርነስ ዘይነበረ ከዓ ኣክሽን ክህሉ ሪኣክሽን ክህሉ ይኽእል ማለት እዩ ስለዚ እቲ ሚድያ ብኩሉ መንገዲ ይንገልፉ ገይሩ ነቲ ሕብረተሰብ በቃ ካብ ትግራይ ብየተፀገም ንፍልፍል ዴሞክራሲ ንከይህሉ ተሕታቲ ትግራይ እያ ሂወት ዝኸፈሉ ምክንያት ተሕታቲ ትግራይ እያ ካሊእ ዝኾነሉ ምክንያት ተሕታቲ ትግራይ እያ ዝብል ዓይነት ነገር በቲ ሚድያ ብዝግባእ ተሰሪሑሉ እዩ ስለዚ ኣብ ዝተፈላለየ ጫፋት ኢና ነርና ኣብ ዝተፈላለየ ጫፋት ላይ ኢና ነርና ከዝለባ ይዘው ኣብ ዝተፈላለየ ጫፍ ኢና ነርና ንሳቶም ብጣዕሚ ሕማቕ ኢቭል ዝኾነ ዕላማ እቲ ሚድያ ከመይ ገይሮም ከም ዝጥቀምሉ ብዝግባእ ይፈልጡ እዮም ሚድያ እንታይ ክሰርሕ ከም ዝኽእል ሓደ ፅቡቅ ዝኾነ ነገር ከመይ ገይሩ ከም ሕማቕ ገይሩ ከርኢ ከም ዝኽእል ትልልዎ ሓይሊ ብዝግባእ ተረዲኦሞ እዮም ዘርፎም ተጠቒሞም እዮም ይጥቀምሉ ኣለዎ ኣና ወገን ግን ናይቲ ሚድያ ኣድላይነት ሕድሕድና ክንዘራረብ ሓሳብ ማዕብል ጥራሕ ዘይኮነሲ በዓልና ኣብ ካልኦት ቦታታት ዝፍፅሙ ነገራት ክንርዳእ ንድ ካልኦት ብዛዕባና ዝሓስቦ ነገር እንታይ ምኾነ ክንርዳእ ንባዕልና እውን ክነረድእ እቲ ኣንፃርና ልገር ናይ ፅላኣት ናይ ጀኖሳይደል ናረቲቭስ ኩሉ ክነፍርስ ንኽእለሉ ዓቕሚ ከም ዝኾነ ብፍፁም ሽምባይዶ ሽዑ ከዚ ድሕሪ ጀኖሳይድ እኳስ ኣዌርነስ ወይ ተፈጥሮ ብጣዕሚ ዝገርም ስለዚ ብዙሕ ግዜ ይብሎ እያ ማለት ሓደ ድፍዕ ቅድሚ ምኹዓቱ ኣብ ርእሲ ወዲ ሰብ ኢሉ እኳ ትድፋዕ እሱ ዝሓለፉ ብዙሓት ዓሰርተታት ዓመታት ኣንፃር ትግራይ ዝኾነ ናረቲቭ ኣብ ትግራይ ማለት ፀገማት ኩሉ ካብ ትግራይ ከም ዝፍልፍሉ ብኩሉ ዓይነት መንገድታት ብኩሉ ዓይነት ቋንቋ ዳርጋ ክበሃል ይኽእል እዩ ይፀሓፍ ይዝረብ ይድረፍ ይግጠም ይድረስ ነይሩ እዩ መፅሓፍቲ ይወፁ ነይሮም እዮም ዝተፈላለዩ ሚድያታት ብጣዕሚ ብሰፊሑ ይንቀሳቀሳ ነይረን እዚኣ ዝዓለማ እዚኣ ለምስኻ ማለት እዩ እና በቃ ኣስተርሒና ኢና ሓሪስና ነርና ክበሃል ይከኣል እንታይ ይኾን ሃምለሎ ስብስሩ ክንሰምዕ እንደጀና ሓንቶ ሓፍትና ተልዕሎ ነይራ ዝልተፈፀመ ብጣዕሚ ሓደገኛ ስቃቅ ዝኾነ ነገር ኣነ ክጥይቕ ዝደለ ነገር እንታይ እዩ ብስሩ ኣዘ ሶሳይቲ እንታይ ኢና ንደሊ ብስሩ ክንነብር ንደሊ ዶ ኣብ ሕብረተሰብ ክንቕፅል ንደሊ ዶ ሕቶ ከልዕሎ ይደሊ እየ ቢካዝ ንድሕር ክንቕፅል ንደሊ ኮይና ክንቕፅል ለኽእሉ ነገራት ክንገብር ኣለና ሓደ ክንቕፅል ለኽእለና ነገር እቲ ኣብ ልዕሊና ዝፍተል በብመዓልቱ ሓድሽ መልክዕ ዝሓዘ ዝቀያየር ጀኖሳይዳል ናሬቲቭ ተኸታቲልካ መፍራስ ክንቕፅል ቱሪ እንድሕር ንደሊ ኮይኑ ናይ ምቕፃል ድሌት ጥራሕ ክንቕፅል ኣይንኽእል እየ ዝፈልጥ ማለት እንታይ ናይ ምቕፃል ድሌት ጥራሕ ክቐፅለና ይኽእል እዩ ውሹድ ኖታት ኩነታት ይቀያየሩ እዮም እዚ ኣካይዳ እዚ ብ19 ወይ ብ20 ክፍለ ዘመን ማለት ሰምሃው ሰርቫይቭ ክነግብር ለየፀገመና ክኾን ይኽእል እዩ ኣብዚ ዘመን እዚ ግን ብዚ መንገዲ ሰርቫይቭ ክንገብር ኣይንኽእል እዩ ኢትስ ኢምፖስብል ስለዚ it's the survival of the fittest ፊት ሃምልኾና ክነርእየሉ ንኽእል ስራሕ ክንሰርሕ ኣለና ፕራክቲካሊ ንሕለይ ሰሪሕና ስርሑ ስለዘይሰርሐ ኦር እቲ ኢሊት ማለት ፖለቲካዊ ሓይሊ ኦር ሕብረት ፖለቲካል ኮሚኒቲ ስርሑ ስለዘይሰርሐ እዩ ከምዚ ዓይነት ናይ መወዳእታ ብጣዕሚ መስካሕክሕ ዝኾን ክፍበል ኣትፈፅሙ እቲ ናይ ትግራይ ፋሚሊ ዩኒቲ እዩ ዳይሬክትሊ ኣታክ ተገይሩ ትኽክር እዩ ተፀኒዑ እዩ ተገይሩ ናይ ትግራይ ሕብረተሰብ ታዩ ተተወቂዑ እዩ ክስበር ዝኽእል ተባሂሉ ተፀኒዑ እዩ ተገይሩ እዚ ማለት እቲ ተግባር ለመፈፀም ግዜ ተወሲዱ ተፀኒዑ እዩ ማለት ክጠፍእ ኮንስፓየር እናተገበረሉ ላርአየ ሱቕ ኢሉ ዝህበሲ ዓይነት ሕብረተሰብ እዩ ኢልና ክንጥይቕ ይግባእ ባህላ ንምንታይ እየ ሲሉ ዘለና ድሕሪ እዚ ኩሉ ጀኖሳይድ ከዚ እውን የዝሓለ ይባይት ተንፃር ትግራይ ዝካየድ ፕሮፓጋንዳ ዝሒሉ ማለት ይኹን ካልኦት ፎከሳት ስለዝተፈጥሩ ከፋፊሎም ወይም በይ ስትራክቸር ናይ ሚድያ ስትራክቸር ኣብኡ ኢሉ it's just there anytime full fledged بالخونه መንገዲ with a second አንፃር ትግራይ ክስለፍ ዝኽእለሉ ስትራክቸር ተሰሪሑ እዩ እዚ ማለት ሙሉ በሙሉ ስርሑ ቋሪፁ እዩ ማለት ይኾነ ግን ስርሑ ይሰርሕሉ እዩ ኸል ይሰርሕሉ ድሕሪ ጀኖሳይድ አንፃር ትግራይ ዝፍጠሩ ሓሶታት ናረቲቭስ ምዛዕ መልሲ ክንህበሉ ንኽእል ኮንክሪት ስቴፕ ክንወስድ ድሕሪ ለይደለና ዘን እቲ ክንወስዱ ዝግበአና ትምህርቲ ካብቲ ዝተፈፀመና ነገር የወሰድናይ ማለት እዩ ኣብ ናይ ትግራይ ሚድያ ወር ትግራይ ሪሌትድ ሚድያ እቲ ጀኖሳይድ ልመፀ ለውጢ እንታይ እዩ ከዚ ብዛዕባ ሚድያ ስለንነጋገር ዘለና እዩ ፖለቲካ እውን ተመሳሳይ ሕቶ ክለዓል ይኽእል እዩ ኣብቲ ማሕበራዊ ኩነታት እውን ተመሳሳይ ሕቶታት ክለዓል ይኽእል እዩ ካልኦት ሴክተርስ እውን ተመሳሳይ ሕቶታት ክለዓል ይኽእል እዩ ኣንደርስታንድ ግን ዋና ኣብ ልዕሊ ትግራይ ሓደጋ ዝመስለሉ ነገር ሓሳብ ዝወለዶ ፖለቲካ ጀኖሳይዳል ሓሳብ ዝወለዶ ጀኖሳይዳል ፖለቲክስ እዩ ጀኖሳይዳል ፖለቲክስ ካብ ስሩ መሰረቱ ቦንቂርካ ለምድበር እዩ ተደልዩት ዋና ክዝለለ ይኽእል ስራሕ ናይ ሚድያ ስራሕ ኢትስ ኤግዚስተንሻል እዚ ካብኡ እንታይ ኢና ተማሂሩ ትግራይ ኣብ ትግራይ ፎከስ ዝገብራ ኦር ትግራይ ሪሌትድ ዝኾነ ሚድያታት ከዝ ቀሊሉ ዶ ስርሐን እቲ ካብ ደገ ዝፍነለሉ ዓይነት ጀኖሳይዳል ናሬቲቭ ሰብ ምክልኻል ስርሐን ቀሊሉ ዶ ንሕልና ኖ የቃለለይ ምናልባት ከቢዱ ክኾን ይኽእል እዩ ምናልባት ከቢዱ ክኾን ይኽእል እዩ ስለዚ ካብ ሕብረተሰብ ክንቐፅል ንሕሉ ደሊ በቃ ክኾነ ኢሉ ተሰሪሕሉ እዩ ትስላእ ተፈጢሩ ተሰሪሕሉ እዩ ኢንቨስት ተገይሩሉ እዩ ግዜ ኢንቨስት ተገይሩሉ እዩ ገንዘብ ኢንቨስት ተገይሩሉ እዩ ጉልበት ሞያ ኢንቨስት ተገይሩሉ እዩ ስላእቲ ተሰርሕ ውፅኢት ስራሕ ይባል ውፅኢት ስራሕ ዝኾነ ስርኢት ብስራሕ ክልበስ ክዕፀፍ ይኽእል እዩ ድሕሪ ተዓፂፉ ግን ሓደጋ ብኸፍአ መንገዲ ተመሊሱ ክመፅእ እዩ ቢካዝ ጀኖሳይድ ዝፈፀሙ ኣካላት ትማሊ ካብ ዝፈፀሙ ጌጋ ይመሃሩ እዩ ንሕና ኢና ዘይንመሃር ዘለና ቤት جينوسايد ፍጹም ሓይልታት ትማሪሲ ፕላን ዝገበርናዮ ተለምናዮ ነገር ሙሉእ ብሙሉእ 100% የተሳካሉ ምክንያት ተኣዩ ኢሎም ኣፅኒዖም እዮም ድግስ መጀመርያ እቲ ጀኖሳይድ ክፍፅምዎ እውን እኮ ብሚድያ እንታይ ተገበርና እዩ ንሕሽ ኢሎም እኮ ብፅንዓት ብስራሕ ጉዳይ ኢሎም እዮም ሰሪሖም እዚ ይርዩ ኣለዉ እዮም ካልኩሌት ይገብሩ ኣለዉ እዮም እንታይ እዩ ጎዲሉ እቲ ጉድኣት ካብዚ ዝበፅሐ ክኾነ ሕብረተሰብ ከም ሕብረተሰብ ናይ ትግራይ ሕብረተሰብ ሰርቫይቭ ከይገብር እንታይ ክንገብር ንኽእል ኢና ኢሎም ካልኩሌት ይገብሩ ኣለዉ እዮም and by the day እቲ ናይ ሚድያ ኢንፍራስትራክቸሮም ይዕብይዎ ኣለዉ እዩ so ኣነ ናይ መወዳእታ ከልዕሎ ደልነት እንታይ እዩ ሰለስተ ደረጃታት ክቕመጥ ይኽእል እዩ ሓደ ሕብረተሰብ ሚድያ ክጥቀመሉ ንኽእል and ሄት ስፒች ክከላኸለሉ ንኽእል ኣንፃሩ ዝካየድ ነገር ኩሉ ክከላኸለሉ ንኽእል ክኾን ይኽእል እዩ ዋላ ዴሞክራሲ ክማዕብለሉ ንኽእል ተባሂሉ ክበሃል ይኽእል እዩ ሓደ ብሓፈሻ ስቴብል ዝኾነ ስትራክቸር ፈጢሩ ትካል ፈጢሩ እቲ ሚድያ ሕብረተሰብ ሕድሕዱ ቱ አ ሞር ፐርፌክት ዩኒየን ክጓዓዝ ምእንቲ ኣብ ምግባር ሚድያ የድልየኒ እዩ ዝሓስብ ሕብረተሰብ እዩ ሕብረተሰብ እዚ ዝተዓደለ ሕብረተሰብ እዩ በቃ ዝተዓደለ ሕብረተሰብ እዩ ስቲል ግን ሚድያ ብጣዕሚ የድልዮ እዩ ቢካዝ እቲ ስርዓት ክምርት ስለ ዝኽእል ክብስብስ ስለ ዝኽእል በቢግዚኡ ፕሬሸር እናተገብረ ዲስኮርስ እናማዕበለ ክኸድ ስለ ዝግባእ እቲ ዝመረተ ሲስተም ናብ ከፋሕ ሓደጋ ክወስድ ከም ዝኽእል ስለ ዝርድእዎ እቲ ሚድያ ስቲል ሃም ሕብረተሰብ as a free and open society ኣድላይ እዩ ካልትረት ኣሳች ኣለዎ ክበሃል ይኽእል ግን ዴሞክራሲ ንምምፃእ ሰማይ አውቶሪታሪያን ማለት ሰማይ ዲክታተርሽፕ ኦር ዲክታተርሽፕ ክኾን ይኽእል እዩ ዘለዎ ስርዓት ኦር ብባርባራ ኤፍ ዋልተርስ ገለፃ እንተወሲድናዮ ኣኖክራሲ ክበሃል ይኽእል እዩ ኣብ መንጎ ዴሞክራሲን ፍጹም ዝኾነ ኣምባገነንነትን ዘሎ ዓይነት ሕብረተሰብ እዩ እዚ ሚድያ ዝደልየሉ ምክንያት ንባዕሉ ካብ ኮምፒቲንግ ናሬቲቭስ ንምክልኻል ክኾን ይኽእል እዩ ግን ብዋነኝነት ዲሞክራሲ ህሉ ተረጋገፀ ሱር ዝተኸለ ንምግባር ሪል ንምግባር ማለት ሪያላይዝ ንምግባር ንዲሞክራሲያዊ ስርዓት ሪያላይዝ ንምግባር ሚድያ የድሊ እዩ ምንነት ዲሞክራሲ ኣሰራርሓ ዲሞክራሲ as a way of life ዲሞክራሲ as a culture ምፍጣር ሚድያ የድሊ እዩ ኢሉ ይሓስብ ሕብረተሰብ እዩ ካባና ኣንፃር ታሪኹ እዚ ሕብረተሰብ እዚ እውን ዝተዓደለ ሕብረተሰብ እዩ ክበሃል ይኽእል እዩ ቢካዝ ሕቱ ኤግዚስቴንሻል ይኾን ሳልሳይ ግን ንኣና ዝመስል ከማና ዓይነት ኣብ ከማና ኣብ ዘለናዮ ኩነታት ዘሎ ሕብረተሰብ ብሱሩ ህልውኑ ኣብ ጥያ ኣብ ሕቶ ለወደቃ ኤግዚስቴንሻል ትረት ዘለዎ ሕብረተሰብ ሚድያ ንምንታይ ይደልይ እዩ ኤግዚስቴንሻል ዝኾነ ሓደጋ ዘለዎ ሕብረተሰብ ሚድያ ዝክነብር ይደልዩ ብዲሞክራሲ ኦር ዲሞክራሲኡ ንምፅራይ ኦር ዲሞክራሲ ሪያላይዝ ንምግባር ጥለ ይኮነሲ ባሕሉት ሕብረተሰብ ከም ሕብረተሰብ ንምቕፃል እዩ ሚድያ ደልዩ ቢካዝ ብዙርይኡ ምጥፍኡ ዝደልዩ ሓይልታት ኣለዉ እዩ ኣብ ኩሉ ቦታ ሕብረተሰብ ክጠፍእ ዝደልዩ ሓይልታት ኣለዉ ማለት ይኮነ ይባይስወይ ኮንፍሊክት ኣብ ዘለዎ ኩሉ ሕብረተሰብ ክጠፍእ ዝደልዩ ሓይልታት ኣለዉ ክበሃል ይኽእል ናይ ትግራይ ኬዝ ግን ብጣዕሚ ዝተፈለየ እዩ ሓሊፉ ዘጋጥም እውን እዩ ኤግዚስቴንሻል ትረት እዩ ዘለዎ ትግራይ ከም ሕብረተሰብ ናይ መቐፃል ምቕፃል እዩ ከም ሕብረተሰብ መቐፃሉ ኣብ ሓደጋ ዝወደቐ ሕብረተሰብ ናይ ግድን ንናይ ባዕሉ ምህላው ሓጋዚ ዝኾነ ኣብ ልዕሊኡ ዝፍጠሩ ጀኖሳይደል ናሬቲቭስ እናተኸታተላ ለፍረሳ ኢንፋክት ኦን ደ ኦፌንሲቭ ከይደን እቲ ትግራይ ልምቹ ዓይነት ናሬቲቭ ኣብ ምፍጣር ክነጥፋ ዝኽእላ ሚድያታት ናይ ግድን የድልይዎ እዮም ካሊእ መንገዲ የብሉ እዩ ባይዘወይ ነቲ ጀኖሳይደል ናሬቲቭ ምክልኻል ካሊእ መንገዲ እዩ ሚድያ ንደልየሉ ምክንያት ከዚ ዴሞክራሲ ንምፅራይ ይኾነ ዴሞክራሲ ስለዘይብልና ዴሞክራሲ ንምምላስ ይኾነ ብከም ሕብረተሰብ ተደላዲልና ስለ ኦፍኮርስ ጎኒ ጎኒ ክስራሕ ይኽእል እዩ ክበሃል ይኽእል እዩ ኔክስት ቻፕተር እሱ እዩ ዋና ነገር ግን ኢትስ ኤግዚስቴንሽን ካብ ሕብረተሰብ ንምቕፃል ኢና ሚድያ ንደሊ እዩ ኤኒዌይስ እና እዚ ንምግባር ኣድላይ እዩ ብጣዕሚ ከዚ ትግራይ ኣነ ስለዝፈልጦ እዩ እቲ ኩነታት ስለዝሰርሐሉ እውን እዩ ሚድያ ተላሳሪሕካ ምቅፃል ብጣዕሚ ከቢድ ዝኮነሉ ኩነታት ተፈጥሩ እና ኣሕና ኣፍኮርስ ዝለካኣልናዮ ክንገብር ኢና ስለክታብተን ንክእላ መጠን ህዝብና እዩ ኣካልና እዩ ባዕልና ኢና ቤዚክሊ ሰባት ዝተፈላለዩ ግዜ ኣብ ጎኒ ህዝብካ ጠጠው ስለዝበልካ ግዛዕ ክብሉ እዮም ጎኒ ዝበሃል ባህሊ እኮ ተስሚ እየ ዝብል ኣነ ግን ኣምሹር ኣብ ሚድያ ዝሰርሑ ሰባት ኣብዚ እውን ቲፒኤም ካልኦት ሚድያ ዝነቱ ሰባት ኣብ ዘለዉ ይፈለጥ እየ እንደምንታይ ከቢድ ምኳኑ ብጣዕሚ ይርድኡ እዮም ቢካዝ ድሕሪ ጀኖሳይድ እዚ ጉዳይ እዚስ ከምዚ ይኮነ ክነነጋገረሉ ግባእና ነይሩ በቃ ትሚታይ ሄት ስፒች ሚድያ ዝግበር ነገር ተሓምለ ምፅኣ ብሱሩ ንሪኦ ኣለና ኢና ብሂወትና ብቤተሰብና ብኣካልና ብንብረትና ብቀፃልነትና ፈተና መፅኡ ምስራዕና እዚ ጉዳይ ይኮነ ዲስካሽን ፖይንት ክኸውን ግብኦ ነይሩ እዩ ይመልስና ግዜ ስለዝወሰድኩ ጥሬታ ግን እዚአን ሓሳባት ብክፃል ኢና ሚድያ ንደሊ ሄት ስፒች እንከላኸለሉ መንገዲ ብካሊእ መንገዲ ብዝግለፅ ኤክስፕሬሽን ኦር ስፒች እዩ እዚ እውን ዝተሳክዐ መንገዲ ክንገብሮ ምእንቲ ከዚ እውን ዝቀፀለ ጀኖሳይድ ምክልኻል ዝሓሸ ስራሕ ክንሰርሕ ይግባእ ክሪት ኣለየ ቀኒለይ ሶሪ ግዜ እንድሕር
يقننا تبي I think كلكم تحت وتريدون تمثلوا إلهم توصلهم بس حكينا حدا خلينا تاخذ التيجر ساتني وأنا يومه من الوقت هذا 3 ساعات حدا بيرا هي كتير كل شيء عندي I think أسي مجمع خيرمو حتى هم من الوقت أفتح حدا ونسرق على الخير هم خلص قصة مسألة لو حسب التالي حتى لكم ممكن أو ريوت فيديو خيركم نسوي ديسكاس مبارك على بدم بسفتحهم على جنا ميديا طن هذه أسي حنت دايرة
أنا دم خجمر أسيق سبب مسا
يلا بالحنت دايرة كأو تيجي ودأت قليل في المستقبل تمنا كلهم قصة سودان
شيطانا حسرة بلا تاشومي إذا تدرس زور وتاشومو كلش نردو ينامو خاب بفلا ميديا بتمصلو تزبحالو أنو خاب زبحالو تجارو ما ده حالة تدرسيو أواسي تدرس بفلا تما بزحتي حزبنا مارينا يردون سقى سرعة بروجرام أمهارينيا مبزحتيو تشوكنتون نفولتو إنا تنا أسا أبسومن فلا حجي بساتلايت زاعات وميديا تاتلو أدامو أبوس أبسومن عند ساعات أبدا من كتاشمو أفتح حزب منكح عند ساعات أنك بروجرام تتسرع حزب لو تدمر عنا حزب حدا جزي يبلنو مهم متى تستحسبو نقدر اللي بتكبينيا ودي اللهو
لا كأنه تقرص في الأسد I couldn't find him
Okay, finally. سينكم من مثلا بخالي بروفايل لذا أتخيو. Thank you تدرس. Already تي مفتح أخوان زغل كايا أو مفيد كايا عندي هاجن. من أربعة حزي كم تي بي إم أوشتي ناوش تسقم سلزة حيلة. تسحبت السو مور زحزن ناي مثل جن. narration set up مقبار في اللاي كاب دقة بزمت تتعوه نعو بخل زخنا ناي ميديا سرحت المسرح حابيرنا بتعقمو سنة ونسلة حابيرنا ناي مسرح عدل كفتر قدن زقبرو مسؤولي سمع النمو أبزل لكاريتو انتايو غمي غير كان عم مفتحي مسل غاري كار كورس هزبي أبزن ميدياتات زياتن كعسل ናይ ግድን እዩ ማለት ሓገዝ ክህሊ ስለ ዝግባእ ማለት እዩ ግን ቅድሚኡ ዘን ሚድያታት እዚኣተን ናሬሽን ሰተብ ምግባር ኣጀንዳ ናይ ምቁራፅ ስራሕቲ ክሰርሓ ብዕላማ መሰረት ገይረን ክኸዳ እንታይ ዓይነት ስራሕ ማለት ታንጅብል ዝኾነ ስራሕ ክሰርሓ ይኽእላ ዝብል እንታይ እዩ እቲ ኦረንቲ ፀገም ገሊፅካዮ እንዲኻ ግን ናብ መፍትሒ ንክነምርሕሲ እንታይ እንተገበረ ይሓይሽ ኢልካ ትኣምን
ገረም ቴዲዋ ብሬክ ንወካሞ ክልቲኦም ገስትና ምስ ኣቕረቡ ዳተፀበዩ ስለዝኾኑ it's about 2 hours now ኮነ ናይ ድሞ ድሓር ኣብ መወዳእታ ርእሰ መሬት ዝገርም if you don't mind
بحثيرو ملسكم مرتكم So thank you ማለት ትግርኛ መቅረብ እና ብሳተላይት መቅረብ ናንተን ምስ ሚድያታት ተሓቢርካ ምስራሕ ኢንተርነትታት ከም ተረዳእን ሰው ብዙሕ ግዜ ይለዓል እዩ ሓደ ትግራይ ኩሉ እዩ ዘድልያ ትግርኛ ክሰርሕ ዝኽእል ሚድያ ኦፍ ኮርስ ናይ ግድን እዩ እቲ መጀመርያ ፎከስ ክኾን ኣለዎ ኣብ ውሽጢ ዘሎ ፖለቲካ ከመይ ጌርካ ክዕረ ይኽእል ብፍሉይ ፖለቲካ እንታይ እዩ ከመይ ይስራሕ ብከመይ ይካየድ ኣብ ልብል እቲ ፖለቲካ ክስልጥን ምእንቲ ፖለቲካ ክስልጥን ከዓ ዝሰልጠነ ኮሚኒቲ ስለዝደሊ ብፖለቲካ በኣንፃር ፖለቲካ ኣብቲ ሕብረተሰብ ዘሎ ኣረኣእያ ብስሩ ካብ መሰረቱ ክስተኻኸል ምእንቲ ምግባር ብጣዕሚ ብዙሕ ስራሕ ከም ዘሎ ይርዳእ እዩ ብጣዕሚ ፅቡቅ እዩ ትግራይ ካብ ዘለዋ ሚድያታት ብጣዕሚ ውሕዳት እየን ካብዚ ላዕሊ ብቁፅሪ ብፅሬት ብዕምቀት ብጣዕሚ ብዙሕ ሚድያ የድሊ እዩ እዚ ማለት ግን ካብ ደገ ልመፅእ ተፃብኦ ዝከላኸላ ሚድያታት እውን ክህልዋ ኣይግባእ ማለት ስለዘይኮነ ሓደ ሓደ ሰብ ይጥይቁ ብምሓርኛ ስለዝተነገረስ ብዛዕባ ትግራይ ወይ ንትግራይ ዝስራሕ እዩ መስሎ ከዘላ ሓተትና ሓውና ከምኡ ኢሉ ይኮን እዩ ዝብል እሱ ሓተቱ ነገር ይርድአኒ ብተወሳኺ ትግርኛ ፕሮግራም ንሓደ ሰዓት ተሰርሐ ኣይመስለካ ኢልኒ ግን ተጋጣሚ ክጥቀመሉ ስለዘለኹ እዩ ሰው ሚስኮት ከይገብሮ ስለዘለኹ እዩ ሰው ولا بمحرنيا بعربيا بسويدش بإنجليزية بكل شيء العالم أنت تعرفنا إثيوبيا خفال على تجري كردو أدرى حيوم كاستخلو information كله فلتت كله بزنس تجري كردو ونتعجندو aspiration دليتو كله كردو من أنت مقبار مالت لازم تجري من الحل مالت أما خل عدو يبخلينا عالم خفال أنصار تجري الخنا الرأي اللي هو حدث مغير مالت حدا نتكرر هي وتحمل عن جيجا الرياض لذي بتعمي ليس سرحلو نقريو division of labor يدلينا يو كقالينا ناقوش تفوكس نقبرين نخلينا يدليو خالوتنا قن نبدأ فوكس نقبر لنا ناقد بيننا ينبرنا نتعلم حدا قاول نايوش حدا قانا حمد الله خوينو حدا قاول بس حدا قاول مسيدنا عيد قرصت نمشي حدا قايب له يسعب بينا عنوات كبسح enabling factor خوينو إلو دابا علاني يقن حدا قاول بس حدا قاول مسيدنا عيد مثلا نوني لذي فينا نفس أمامنا تبقى محرية بإنجليزية بسوديش بعربي بخلي قنقل سرح كلش is part of that تقرأينا مدحن endeavor مالي حمو تجيرو يقرأ له هذا program بحرية سلسلة بخلي قنقل سلسلة part of that تقرأينا مدحن بس على سهم يقول تجيرو بس شو مكرر يولي now لا تحطوك من ليش بتقرأينا خسر إحنا لينا ساتلايتون ممكن بس مدلنا إذا خلتنا قرأت كين قبل حاجتنا نقر ناي resources قدام إحنا أنا داونت as a mission as a lifetime mission لو سرخوه ليك علي خالي إذا حشة من قدرون تيزو سر من كبار إلى حسب كل قناتات تحلي تفتيرون زي أكثر سبيل وليون كورس بقى بتميديا من قدم خد بسيط هاوي قناي خالي من قد كل شلون حيلة بقى حبت ميديا كوث اللي خلى العدل نيو يبقى على because أنا نتميديا بميديا نتو يكون يدري as a vehicle serve كول serve لمقبار يدري ስለዚህ خالي الحشة من قد النيو يدري حزيبا I think مستميديا سلام والكده لنا يمثلني جن خذ للأوان جن بمتن بعينة ميديا عند ميديا effective بالخلا من قد نتنارتيف مخيار لسأل instrument على الأمنة يملك ስለዚህ ታየው ሲና በቃ ኦኬ ታልክ ላክሳር ዲያ ካብ ዝኽእሉ ላዕሊ ምሽካም ምንም ከይሰርሕ ዝገብር ነገር እዩ ስለዚ ኣነ ዝኽእላታ እያ ኣብ ልብል እየ ተወሲነ ዘሎ ስራሕ ስሲ ግን ብሰፊሑ ክስራሕ ዘለዎ ብጣዕሚ 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 ልልክት ኢና ዘለና ካልእ ወገድ ዘለዎ ሓይልታት ግን ይገስግስሉ እዮም ስለዚ ብትግርኛ ክንሰርሕ ላ ዘለና ኣብ ሳተላይት ክንመፅእ ላ ዘለና እውን ሽግርና እሱ እዩ ሓደ ሓደ ምፅራባት ኣለዉ ምስ ኣክሱማውያን ሚድያ ዝገበርናዮም ንሳቶም እውን ብዙሕ ዓቕሚ ፀገም ከም ዘለዎም ይርዳእ እየ ብከመይ ከም ንሕግዞም እዩ ዘይተረዳእ ንኣነ ማለት ኣነ ኤርታይም ዝሕቦምናስ ብምላሹ እንታይ ኢና ንህቦም ይብል ምንም መፍትሒ ክረክበሉ ይኽእል ነገር እዩ ገንዘብ ክንህቦም ኣይንኽእል እዩ ኦብቪየስሊ ገንዘብ ይምስላይ ብከመይ ሳፖርት ከም ንገብሮም ክርዳእ ስለዘይከኣለ we are thinking about how to ማለት ከይዲ ከመይ ጌርና ከም ንቐፅሎ ግን ድሌት ኣለና እቲ ሪሶርስና ግን ብጣዕሚ ካብ ትግምትዎ ላዕሊ ዝተመደበ እዩ ሶሱ ተረድኡ ነቦ ምክንያት እዩ ምስ ሚድያታት ምስራሕ ኣድላይ እዩ ምርጫ እውን የኮነ ኣድላይ እዩ በሓላ እያ ቢያንስ ቤዚካዊ ዝኾኑ ናይ ትግራይ ጉዳያት ናሬቲቭ ሴተን ምግባር ትግራይ እንታይ ድልያ ኣብ ልብሉ ነገራት ዳይቨርሲፋይድ ዝኾኑ ሓሳባት ክቐርቡ ይኽእሉ እዮም ግን ካብነት ኣብ ኣድላይነት ምህላው ንምቕፃል እንትል ትግራይ ፍጹም ብፍጹም ብፍጹም ክንፈላለዩ ንኽእል እዩ ካብ ደገ መፅኡ ሓደ ሓይሊ ትግራይ ከመሓድር ኣብ ዝግበር ፈተነ ክንፈላለዩ ንኽእል እዩ ክኾኑ ስለዘይግብኦ ብስሩ ማለት ትግራይ ክኽተል ኮይኑ ብናባዕሉ ዓቕሚ እዩ ክኾን ዝግብኦ ክኾን ዝኽእል እውን እሱ እዩ ሰልፍ ሪላያንስ ኮይኑ ሰልፍ ሪላያንስ ማለት ምስ ካልኦት ዘይምርኻብ ማለት ከም ዘይኮነ ኣብ ግምት ኣቲና ማለት እዩ ብዙሓት ክጠቕሰል ንኽእል ቤዚክ ዝኾነ ኣጀንዳታት ቤዚክ ዝኾነ ናሬቲቭ ኣብ መስራሕ ክስራሕ ምግባእ በዓስ ነገር እዩ ስለዚ ብሓባር ክንሰርሕ ኣለና ባህላ እየ ዝርዝራቱ ክንነጋገረሉ ንኽእል ኢና ግን ናይ ግድን እዩ ግን ዋና ነገር እቲ ክቕፅል ንልልዮ ሕብረተሰብ እቲ ብዝተፈላለዩ ዓይነት ዋላና ፍልጠት ዋላና ገንዘብ ዋላና ካልእ ዓይነት ሪሶርስ ዘለዎ ዓቕሚ ዘለዎ በዓል ሃፍቲ ዋላ ምሁር ዋላ ካሊእ ኩሉ ብዛዕባ ሚድያ ዘለዎ ርድኢት ግን ቦይ ብጣዕሚ ድሑር እዩ ክብል ይኽእል እየ ስለዚ እሱ እዚ ንሕና ፀገም እንታይ እዩ ሚድያ ተዓዩ ኢልና ሚድያ ንምንታይ ይጠቅም ኢልና ምተረዳእና እዩ ኦኬ ተን ቲፒኤም እንታይ ክሰርሕ ይደሊ ንምባል it's phase 2 phase 1 እንታይ እዩ ኣታ ሚድያ ኮ ይጠቅም እዩ ኣታ ሚድያ ኮ ቤተሰብ ህልውና ኣድላይ እዩ ኢልካ ምርዳእ ናይ ምርዳእ ዓይዳ እውን ኣብ ልዕሊና ወዲቁ እዩ ስለዚ እሱ እዩ ሽግር ግን ሓቢርካ ምስ ስራሕ ተማረፅ ዘይብሉ መንገዲ ባህላ የቀድኒየለይ ጊዜኩም ስለወሰዱ ሪታ ቴንክ ዩ
ቴንክ ዩ ቴዲ ይቅርታ ደቂ ዓበይቲ ታይም ሊሚቴሽን ስለለና ንኩልኩም ክነብይ ንኽእል ግን ኣብ ርእስና ካብቶም ሕቶ ክተቕርቡ ትኽእሉ ኢኹም ቴዲ ካሊእ እውን ገስ ጌርና ስለነምፅኦ ብጣዕሚ ኣሜዳ ቴዲ ሓውና next guest will be Duke if you are available.
Hello.
Hi. Welcome.
I've just been enjoying the talk. I'm sorry.
You can hear Teddy and everybody, right?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining. So next you are presenting on the siege and weaponizing food. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. And thank you everybody for coming and having me. I'm going to try to share my screen now. And see if this works. This is weird.
Yeah, it's working. You can see.
Is
Yeah,
it? Can you see just the slide, or do you see the slide in the next slide?
No, just the slide. The first one.
Oh, okay.
This one.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. My presentation is going to be about the siege of Tigray. I know that a lot of you are familiar with this. I'm sure all of you are familiar to an extent. This is going to be, we're going to look back at what happened And we can take a little bit of a long view now, since this is in the past. I'm going to try to get through these slides fairly quickly because I don't want to take up too much time on stuff you already know about. If you would like a copy of this presentation, I'll send it to the organizers, or you can just DM me or send an email to the email that's there, burbridgeduke@gmail.com, and I'll send you a copy of the presentation if you want it. All right. So the background is, as everybody knows, the invasion in November 2020, civilians in Tigray have been block phrase for most of the past year in some areas of Tigray for the entire duration. There is access in some places now, but of course in places like Iro, Western Tigray, but also some areas of Southern Tigray, I believe, are still inaccessible. It's sort of touch and go. There's areas of the Central Zone, areas of the Northwest Zone, areas of the Eastern Zone, pretty much anywhere but the Southeastern Zone and Mekelle there are parts of it that are still inaccessible. The death toll is around 1 million. The true scale of the people who have died will never be known, I don't believe. So I just wanted to take you through a quick outline here. I look at it in 4 different phases: the blockade and the siege. The first phase was international pressure, then collapse, then the Pretoria implementation and the meltdown of the humanitarian response. So let's just start at around June 2021. There was an assessment performed by the IPC, which is pretty much the gold standard of food insecurity. They took an assessment right before the war started, and then they took an assessment about a few months later to see where they were. What they found was alarming. About 350,000 people were already at stage 5, phase 5 of food insecurity, which is catastrophe or famine. These are people who are starving to death. This is famine. Now, of course, a famine declaration cannot be made until you know that there are 2 people for every 10,000 are dying every day. It's a daily death toll of more than 1 million people, or I'm sorry, a daily death toll of more than 1,000 people in Tigray. So if in 1 month, 30,000 people starve to death, that would not meet the criteria for famine. So when people try to get cute about whether or not there was a famine, they're not speaking language that anybody else understands. They're speaking a very technical language, and unless they are an expert in food security, they should not be listened to when it comes to there's no famine or there's not quite a famine or famine. It's a famine. It's what everybody would call a famine. So what they found was that if food didn't step up, if they didn't step up the humanitarian aid, then an additional 50,000 people would be at phase 5 within the next couple of months. And of course, that didn't happen. One thing I want to highlight here is that there has been some controversy about, there was a UN OCHA update that said that there were 900,000 people who were on aid, who required humanitarian assistance prior to the war. Now that may be true, but that's a misleading statistic. They could have been, this could have had to do with livelihoods. This could have had to do with water and sanitation. It could have had to do with a number of things. Here's the reality, is that before the war, only 2% of the Tigrayan population was in stage 4 or 5. They were all in stage 4. Nobody was in stage 5. Now, the pre-war projection, what they believed was going to happen before the war started, was that this would grow to 5% would be at emergency, which is phase 4. The reality is the third bar that you see there in the graph. That's what happened. 37% of the population was either stage 4 or stage 5 of food insecurity. This is when things get very desperate. This is when people are selling off things that they really don't have to sell. Like they're selling land, or they're selling livestock that's part of their breeding herd, or they're selling things that can't be replaced, things that they need to survive. They're selling anything to get food. This is where 37% of the population was. So when this famine declaration, or not the famine declaration, when this food insecurity assessment came out, there was a lot of alarm, as there should have been. Now, of course, we all remember in Addis, where the prime minister was running for election, he famously said there's no hunger in Tigray. Well, nobody was believing that because there were some very good indications that there was pervasive starvation in Tigray. You can see some of the headlines here. The U.S. brought pressure on the Ethiopian government. The EU brought pressure on the Ethiopian government. Samantha Power, if you'll recall, came down to Ethiopia to speak to the prime minister. The prime minister hid in his own capital city to avoid speaking to her. There was a very challenging game of cat and mouse being played there. President Biden actually issued an executive order, something that doesn't happen very often, to hold people accountable or to threaten to hold people accountable. And we'll see if that happens. So the UN came in, and on September 2nd, there was an article published. It was an interview where Secretary General Antonio Guterres said what a lot of people had already said, which is that there is a de facto blockade on Tigray. Let me take a second to say what that means. All you have to do to block humanitarian aid is to say you can't go, that you can't deliver humanitarian aid to this area. That's all you have to do. There were people, I was seeing reports, people say, no, you can drive down that road, it's fine. It could be a perfectly good road. It was a perfectly good road from afar into the capital of Tigray. But all they have to do, all Abiy had to do was say, you can't go. And that's what he did. The UN Secretary General called that out. The former Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs, Mark Lowcock, had called that out, had already said that there's a blockade. The incoming Undersecretary of Humanitarian Affairs is the guy in the middle here, Martin Griffiths, who again said food is being blocked, aid is being blocked from getting into Tigray. There's a siege going on. One day after he gives this interview, the head of the UN OCHA, the head of UNICEF, the heads of all of the major UN humanitarian agencies get declared persona non grata and are asked to leave within 72 hours. Now, the deadline for them to leave happened to be on a World Peace Day, which is a mind-boggling thing. One person that wasn't asked to leave was the country head of the World Food Program, S.W. Amamo. He wrote a memoir about this. He was very close to the Ethiopian government. He says so in his book. He acknowledges this. A lot of people thought he was too close. And he was not asked to leave because he wasn't pushing very hard to get food into Tigray. So he was allowed to stay. So the Ethiopian government essentially called their bluff. They kicked him out. They said that the UN tried to push back and say there's no legal reason for them to have to leave. They said, no, I'm sorry, they're gone. And it worked. They, in addition to kicking people out, they did other things to intimidate the UN or to stop the humanitarian response. They arrested 70 drivers who were, responsible for getting food into Tigray. They launched an airstrike on the airport when a UN humanitarian plane was landing. Some people would say, well, that's just how war is. And no, it's not. It's not how war is. During war, you don't give clearance for a UN humanitarian plane to land, to travel to Mekelle. There wasn't a lot of traffic at that point. You don't give clearance for them to land and then hit the airport with an airstrike. Now, the reason they did that, what appears to be the reason why they did that, without getting into anybody's head, was to use the humanitarian flight as a human shield for their fighters. And of course, the Tigrayans did not fire on the airplanes. They were able to do their airstrike, but this was also to intimidate the UN, which appears to have worked because they folded. In around December 2021, this actually happened on the same day. December 2021, Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, great news, food, humanitarian assistance is restarted. 157 trucks arrived to Mekelle this morning, and everything's back online. That same day, the U.S. Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, Molly Fee, said that the United States government was not going to make a public determination on war crimes, ethnic cleansing, genocide, in order to allow space and time to see if the talks that are currently underway can make progress. You see, that's in 2021. Those talks didn't succeed for another year. They made a pivot towards optimism in January 2022. There was Antonio Guterres was delighted with the progress, and he believed that there's meaningful improvement in humanitarian access. Of course, that didn't happen. This is a update from April 2022 from the logistics cluster. This is when food was able to get into Tigray again. From the time that he said that it was going to restart in December to April 2022, nothing had come in. Just that one convoy that he talked about and about 60 other trucks. But that's it. So they finally got things restarted. It restarted on April Fool's Day. The restart was, charitably speaking, it was botched. They would let fuel in or food, never both. So food didn't really restart until much later. It didn't get out to people. People were still starving. People were still dying, even though the UN and everybody else was saying, hey, this is restarted, everything's great. But it wasn't great because during this entire time, during the entire siege, they weren't treating civilians in Tigray as human beings. They were a distraction from this peace process that was completely stagnated. They were something of just little more than a distraction. They weren't looking at the situation from the perspective of the people that needed food. And so that's, I don't know if that's a reason or if it's a byproduct of the fact that these, officials, the UN officials, US officials, EU officials, they never really turned their words into action. And eventually they just stopped talking about the fact that people were being starved to death because of this peace process that was taking way too long, because everybody knew that Abiy was allowed to starve people to death during the peace process. So phase two, the reoccupation, famine, and siege. In August, of course, hostilities began again. They shut down the humanitarian access again. No access, virtually no access. Nothing was getting in. They actually, interestingly enough, shut down humanitarian access one day before the hostilities started again. Now, either they had a crystal ball in Addis to say, here's when Tigray is going to start again, or it's very, very clear that it was the Ethiopian government troops that restarted the war. That appears to be the only logical conclusion. But food was shut down again. People are starving at this point. People are starving to death. They're being used as pawns. They're being used as collateral for this peace process that just had been completely off track. That takes us all the way into October. And in November, after all the games, after all the nonsense, they finally sign a cessation of hostilities agreement. In that cessation of hostilities agreement, they are both enjoined to make sure that humanitarian assistance is able to get to all of the people in Tigray who are in need. Everybody who's in need should have humanitarian access. They have never kept that promise. That has never been something even that my cameras talked about. I haven't heard anybody talk about the fact that other than Tigrayans and their family. I've never heard anybody talk about the fact that this promise that they made to preserve international humanitarian law, this maybe shouldn't even have been in an agreement because it's basic humanitarian law. To ask them to stop committing crimes against humanity is usually not something you would find in a peace treaty. But we have it here, and they still didn't stop. So here's what aid looked like post-Pretoria. They were able to scale it up to a certain extent, but then, of course, food aid was suspended. There was a theft of food in Shiraro, evidently. That's still a little murky because they never released the details of the investigation. And from all of the digging that I could do about it, I'm not even sure there was an actual report of the investigation. They had already given up. So food aid completely stopped. The civilians, the families who were getting food after the Pretoria Agreement had been waiting for years for this food. And then it was just taken out from underneath them completely across the board, as we all know. And so there you have it. These are the articles that was written about that at the time. This is so many articles. I've written some of them myself, but they were staring this in the face. They knew that people were starving. They knew that the harvest did not come out the way that they wanted it to. How could it have? And they still weren't delivering food. Again, Tigrayan civilians were being treated as less than human beings. There is a concept in humanitarian work, also in peace building, which is the field that I was in prior to this, of do no harm. They applied do no harm to donors, to governments. That's not what do no harm means. Do no harm means the people that you're trying to help, you don't hurt them. The USAID and the World Food Program has never lived up to that promise, which is a basic fundamental pillar of humanitarianism. They haven't. So to look at where we are now, just to bring us to sort of where things stand at the moment, because after several months, the siege was, or the humanitarian suspension was lifted. People survived the siege. They survived the suspension. Those who did, many people died. We will never know how many people starved to death, but we know that they starved to death due not only to the actions of the Ethiopian government, the Eritrean government, and the Amhara regional government, and the Afar regional government. They also starved to death due to the inaction of Western governments, donor countries, everybody that wanted to see. I believe you saw the recent article by Fred Harder, where the European Union, a source from the European Union said they're a good trade partner. So we didn't want to, we don't want to push things. Well, that's essentially what we have here. So where we are now is that weaponized starvation has been recognized by the International Commission of Human Rights Experts in Ethiopia, the ICHRI Commission. That commission, of course, was shut down by the Ethiopian government, but before it was, they called this out. This is also the subject of the Lowenstein's clinic of Yale Law School, who looked at the evidence to see that this was a crime against humanity, at least a crime against humanity. Now, in my opinion, due to the nature of the siege, this was genocide on its own, without considering even the many massacres that occurred, the weaponized sexual violence that we know happened, without looking at the way that Tigray was systematically torn apart, the way civilians were directly targeted in any other way, if you just look at weaponized starvation, I believe that this should reach the threshold of genocide. Now, altogether, it's very hard to argue it's very hard to argue that it doesn't represent genocide. In fact, the recent findings of the New Line Institute put out a study that said, in their legal opinion, there's reasonable cause to believe that genocide had been committed by the Ethiopian government, the Eritrean government, the Amhara Regional Forces, Fano, those sorts of things. But this is, it's been recognized. Now this is settled fact that food was used as a weapon of war. So where are we now? This is very sad because this is a map that's more than a year old. However, it hasn't changed that much. The area in yellow, Western Tigray, is inaccessible to humanitarian aid. Areas towards the northern border with Eritrea some places are accessible, some places are not accessible, but most places are very risky to deliver humanitarian aid. In the south, there's still some problems. In the southern areas of the northwestern zone, there's still problems with access. It is appalling that 2 years after the Pretoria Agreement, we're still looking at the same map, essentially. So where the people are right now, as far as malnutrition, is something that we don't know very much. They did a SMART survey last year that found that 31% were acutely malnourished, children under 5 years old. This year, they did another survey. Now they see 30.6%. So that's the very small incremental difference that we've had. Very, very small progress. However, when you look at this study, what jumps out at you is their methodology. This is where they looked. If you look closely at this map, they have avoided any area that has a large concentration of IDPs. People who are displaced, people who have, and the people who are displaced, they have very little access to any sort of employment. Maybe some informal employment, some areas, but nothing that you could feed a family on. We have no idea how much food is getting to them because the World Food Program no longer closely tracks that sort of thing, or else doesn't report it. Maybe they have that information, they just don't report it, but they don't report it. So for whatever reason, and I have gotten responses on I've asked why and why and why. I've got responses that range from this was a donor, the donors insist on this, to this is what the Ethiopian government allowed, to this is just what they decided to look at. To avoid urban areas, when you're looking at malnutrition, when you have a huge displaced population, it's inexplicable. There's no way to explain why this made sense to anybody. But that's what they've done. I can't find out. There's been another round of assessments taken by the IOM, DTM, which is a displacement tracking matrix. They do a very good job. However, they have not released their latest round of assessments. It hasn't been released. It should have been released by now. They've released preliminary numbers, but preliminary numbers don't tell us much. They've also conducted a multi-sectoral assessment, which is their way of saying all of the different sectors, water and sanitation, food security, nutrition, medicine, all of these things, we're going to do a huge assessment of the entire region of Tigray. Of course, this assessment also did not assess Western Tigray, did not assess Europe, did not assess pretty much the areas here that are inaccessible, they didn't assess. And they also, if you look at their methodology, they had a 2% return rate on their surveys from IDPs. So 2% of their population of the multi-sectoral assessment were IDPs in an area where maybe 1 in 5 maybe 1 in 6 are displaced. So they have again ignored the displaced households of Tigray. This is the insidious nature of dehumanization, because you don't just stop, you don't stop and decide, I'm going to call somebody human again. What they've done is they have made Tigrayan families, households, children under 5 years old, pregnant women, they've ignored them. And they continue to do so to this day. And I hope this is something that we can change in the future. Because this is just my last slide, and I like this slide. I love this part. Where it says, how have most IDPs obtained food assistance? This is from a survey from September of last year that the IOM did. They asked everybody, okay, they haven't been getting food from the food agencies. You see formal food assistance at 4%. People just haven't gotten food assistance at 2%. People have found other ways, perhaps employment, perhaps something else, at 6%. But the reason why people are still alive today in Tigray, the reason why IDPs are still alive, the reason why Tigray survived this genocide so far, the reason why they fought off 3 genocidal armies and the entire world being indifferent to the people starving to death is because of that 88% host community donations. What that means is that the people in the community got together to save the lives of their brothers, their friends, their family members, people who didn't live in their area, people that came to their city from elsewhere because they couldn't stay there any longer because they were being killed. They came to their city and they found people who were able to give them food. And the people that were giving them food did not have much food. This is after the siege, after the suspension. People are still giving money, giving food to people in their community who don't have any food. And that is the only bright spot you can see from what has been done to Tigray as far as food security goes, is that the people in the community came together to keep people alive. So I'm going to end it there. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you. Good.
All right, thank you for this presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Next will be Shawit on the psychological trauma of Tagaru because of this Tigray genocide. Thank you for joining, Shawit. You can come up.
Hello, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, hello. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to the presenters that have talked about just the trauma that the people of Tigray have experienced. I just want to take a second to do a deep breath together because I'm feeling pretty heavy right now. So. Okay, so my name is Sawit, or if I'm in Tigray, Shawit. I am currently a graduate student at the University of Denver studying international disaster psychology, which is just fancy words for global mental health. My goal with this is, to take everything that I'm learning to take it back to Tigray to help the people of Tigray. So like it was said, I'm here to talk about the impact on the psychological trauma of the people in Tigray, the people in the diaspora, just the Tigrayan people as a whole, and try to connect everything that was talked about the weaponization of humanitarian access, to the gender-based violence, to the intergenerational trauma that is occurring. So if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. And yeah, here we go. So like I said, I'm in grad school, so we use a lot of models to kind of understand these different systems and how it affects an individual. And I think this model is really helpful to understand the complexities that a person is facing. Oh, let me make it. Sorry, I just saw someone wants me to make it bigger, but I don't know if I can do. I don't know. Hold on.
That's great. That's great. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I think if I do full screen, I won't be able to see my note. So I'm gonna keep it like this. I'm sorry.
It's fine.
So this model, I think, is really important to kind of understand all the systems at play that impact an individual to lead them to having depression, anxiety, PTSD, whatever it might be. I find it really helpful. Hopefully you guys will also after all of this. And so we're going to go through each part. So we're going to start from the furthest out layer, which is the historical part, and then make our way to the individual. And so what is the historical context and why is that relevant when we talk about mental health? So the reason it's so important is because there's this thing called epigenetics, which basically means that someone that has not directly experienced a trauma can still be more prone to developing these mental health disorders just by their parents or their grandparents' generation experiencing trauma. And this is super relevant to when we talk about Tigray, because if we just go back, 20, 30 years ago when the Derg regime happened, and I think about the trauma my mother experienced, and even though I wasn't born, because of the stressful event and the trauma she endured, that is then carried over to the offspring. So that means if I experience a trauma, I am more prone to develop these mental health disorders. And as we can tell, anyone that is Tigrayan has that, is more prone to develop these mental health disorders. And next level, we have the community, which is just the cultural identity. And this, I think, is the most beautiful part, because this is the music that we're able to listen to, the language that we can freely speak, the way we are able to wear our flag proudly in the streets. So if we look about the people that were living on East during the time of the war and how they weren't able to speak Tigrinya in the buses out of fear of persecution, and what that psychologically does to a person, it kind of makes them feel like, who are they if they can't speak their native tongue? And then we can kind of look at the people living in Sudan, the refugees that are now living in a different country, and how they don't have maybe access to TAFE, which we all know is the soul of Ethiopian food. And then that also adds a layer of complexities of a loss of identity, which is very apparent when we think about the refugees in Sudan and then internally displaced people in Tigray. But that's also kind of a protective factor if we think about the people that were living in the United States during this time and how they were able to listen to Tigrinya music proudly and dance to it and find solidarity with one another. That is kind of how these factors can either be protective or harmful. So for the diaspora community, the cultural identity became really important to keep them safe and mentally healthy. And so the next layer is the institutional. And I think Duke really highlighted the importance of having access to humanitarian aid and what it can psychologically do to a person when they don't have access to food, water, resources. We can tell them, we'll get to the statistics, but the psychological damage is very apparent. So it's really important to make sure when we're thinking about interventions and ways to address the mental health crisis that are happening to the people of Tigray is that we realize that the lack of access to humanitarian aid isn't just that, right? This has a psychological impact to the individual. So we have to take that into consideration also. And so like when the World Food Program, abruptly stopped providing food to people, what that did to them. Or I think about when I was in Sudan, the organization that was providing water to the refugee camp stopped for whatever reason. And we literally had a protest in the refugee camp because we understood that water is a mental health crisis. Okay, so as we move on, we get to kind of the interpersonal level of the effects it has on the person. So when we talk about interpersonal, this is the direct impact, having access to school, your family support, having a church around can immediately impact an individual. And this is the part I think most people kind of focus on when they think about mental health and psychological well-being, is how do we, make sure children have schools so their mental well-being is better. But this is why it's important to taking consideration of all the other levels that are in effect that impacts a child's well-being. So I think about when I, over the summer, I was in Tigray and I was able to be a part of an organization called EASE, Extending Access and Systems Enhancements. We created a child-friendly space for children because we understood that their day-to-day lives needed to have a safe space. So it's important to remember of kind of the interpersonal does matter, but all the systems before that also matter. Or we think about maybe mothers who are a single mother because of the war and their husband, was fighting in the war and potentially lost their lives. And now the family system is being affected because maybe the person that was providing, the financial economic stability is no longer there to do that. And so then now we get to the individual, the person that is actually experiencing the mental health crisis. And now we know that the historical context, the community, institutional, the interpersonal, all kind of leads to an individual either experiencing a mental health crisis or not. And so if we look at this statistic, which I shouldn't come as a surprise necessarily, but I think it really highlights the severity of the mental health crisis in Sudan and in Tigray. This one specifically is for the internally displaced people, so the ones that were already residing in Tigray being moved to a different location. And over half of the people are experiencing PTSD. And now we kind of understand it's not just because of the genocide that occurred. It's all of these other layers that were working against them that kind of leads to this. And I couldn't find an exact statistic of like the mental health crisis in Sudan, but we can assume it's probably higher because now you're living in a different culture, in a different country, and that adds a layer of complexities to it also. And so now I kind of want to show these two videos. One, because they just make me happy and they kind of remind me of the resilience children have. And then I'll talk about it. So. Every time I see that, I like grin so widely because I mean, you can just see the joy in their faces and the light in them. And this is why I am so thankful to have been a part of ISBA, International Society for Better Health Access, and that Dr. Tigas allowed me to learn from her and the way their organization works, because the way that ISBA takes any intervention they decide to do in Sudan or Tigray, Ethiopia, anywhere, is kind of through this ecological model. So as we can see, these children are students, right? This is their end of the school year celebration. The school functions as similarly as possible to as it would in Tigray. They have uniforms, which makes them kind of goes to that cultural, societal, feeling like you belong, like normalcy. The school had access to water, which we understand is a humanitarian or is a mental health factor. And all of these things kind of ultimately allow these children to experience joy and increase their well-being. So that's why I feel like this ecological model is so useful when we think about anything we do. I think about myself and how I fit into it. I like working on an interpersonal. I like one-on-one therapy. I like working with students directly. But that doesn't mean that everyone has to do that. I think we are all put on this earth to do different things. We all have different skills and knowledge. But as we can tell, like working as a humanitarian, let's say, officer, and making sure people have access to food is a mental health issue. Or working to make sure, kids have access to a school is a mental health priority. So it all kind of ties back to the psychological well-being of people. And then this other video is over the summer, I was able to go to Tigray and work along Ease and Dr. Dawit and creating this program for these kids. And so let's watch this. So please ignore my Tigrinya. It is not great. I'm working on it. If you know any teachers, please send them my way. But we were creating these stress balls for the children so they can have something to take home. So when they are feeling stressed, they can, instead of maybe lashing out and fighting, which is normally what we see with children that are experiencing PTSD, they have different tools to lean onto. And even that program was in consideration of the ecological model of how can we make sure they're in a safe space, that they have access to food and water, that they're around people that are similar to them. And so all of these things, as we can tell in their kids' faces, the joy, the happiness in them. So that's why I feel like highlighting those two videos is really important, because I think sometimes, obviously because of the crisis and the atrocities that have occurred, that it's easy to fixate on the gloom of it all and the depression rates and the anxiety rates. But kids and adults are resilient. And I think it's up to us as people living in the diaspora community to kind of uplift these stories and these voices and doing what we can. So lastly is kind of what now? So I want to take a moment and I want everyone to think about whether or not that this war has psychologically impacted you. Really evaluate if you felt sadness, grief, PTSD in the last 4 years. And without a show of hands, I'm going to assume that the majority of the people on this call have experienced psychological distress since the war began. And so now my next question is for everyone, is have you sought out professional psychological support? And I'm willing to bet that the majority of the people here haven't. So my final question then is, how do you expect your family and your loved ones back home to seek professional psychological support and therapy and get over our cultural stigma if you yourself have not done the work to overcome that stigma? I was asked here to come talk today about what can we do to address the psychological impact this war has caused. And I'm not here to kind of repeat what we already know that needs to be done, such as donating money, getting connected, building community, but rather to ask of something radical from you all, into taking real steps and breaking the mental health stigma in our community. Not only to pave the way for our loved ones back home, but also to validate the struggles in the diaspora and the real healing that is absolutely necessary for us all. And I say this as someone that has sought therapy, that is working to be a future therapist themselves, and I know the impact that it's had on me. And then I also say this as someone that has seen the distress in my mother's eyes the last 4 years, the graying of the hair, the inability to sleep at night because the phone might ring and there might be news to be told. And I think if we take in consideration everything that has been talked about today, we know that the fight for peace and real healing in Tigray is going to take a lot of work. But that work can only be done if we're strong enough and if we take care of ourselves. And I know it's probably uncomfortable because we think about all the things that need to be done. But how can you heal Tigray if you haven't healed yourself? And so I'll leave you with this anecdote. After my time in Sudan, I was there for almost a year. I was on my way back. I finally landed in Addis, and I was in the car with my uncle on my way to my grandma's house, and I cried. I lost it, hysterical, just guttural cries. And I realized I hadn't cried for that whole time while I was in Sudan. I was trying so hard to be strong for everyone around me, my students, their parents, the community, that I didn't realize the impact that was having on me, which led me to taking a year off. I went back home, I lived with my family, I let them take care of me. I grieved, I was angry at all the stages, to heal myself, to allow myself to understand the gravity of what all of this is and what this has taken on us as individuals. But now I'm here. I was able to go back to Tigray this summer. I'm in a program that is all kind of for Tigray, and I think about how, any intervention, any modality, how does it apply to the work we want to do? But we have to be strong ourselves to really make sure the work that we're doing is sustainable. So I'm going to leave you all with that. If you need any resources or guidance, or I don't know if there's anything that I could provide, please reach out. Yeah, thank you for letting me come here and talk.
Thank you, Shawita. That's a really good presentation, especially asking ourselves, are we okay? And then seeking help. There are a lot of programs that can help us, through healing. So you can contact Shawit, and Haman Zodi is here too. So we have a community healing program every Saturday. If you need any resources, I can also provide here. And I think that somebody is asking your question about the data. If you have, Andom is asking, I think the data. So if you see that question, you can answer it. I can give you 2 minutes.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, you're wanting more statistics on the mental health prevalence. Andom, I don't know if you could provide clarity.
Andom Malahado.
But if that is the case, I can send in the links where I found these statistics. I will say that something that I noticed while I was in Tigray talking to people there is a lot of doctors and professionals have said that the research related to the mental health isn't widely known. So that is kind of an action item that we should all be aware of, just kind of increasing the research and data around this topic. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, he said yes. Okay. So yeah, thank you, Shawita and your Tigrinya is really, really great. The Tigrinya, you have to do it in Tigrinya next year. So we'll challenge you.
That's the goal. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, you should be better than Zodi. So thank you. It was amazing. We had really great presenters today. I hope ተፈላለዩ ቶፒካት ነዊሕ ስለዝነበራ ንእሽተይ ይቅርታ ሰዓት ወሲኽና ኢና ግን it was really for a good cause and we should see what is going on, what is happening and what is our future, especially when it comes to Tigray now. Spread out in Boro. This is live on TPM. Halot Wunza, especially Mai Kadra, Medimel Tanagara, Mediterranean Neyruና ብዛዕባ ማይ ካድራ ዝተረኸበቱ ነይሩ ካሊእ ዝተሰርሐ ዶክመንተሪ እውን ኣብ TPM ትረኽብዎ ኢኹም በዚያ ተግንይዎ ኢኹም anybody if you guys have any remarks I can give like 2 minutes each. ሰለስተ ሰባት ተቀበልየ ድሓር closing remark by ኣሰፋ if you guys have any feedbacks or questions to summarize this before Asifa come to the closing remark. It's gonna get in. Sure, I can give 3 people 2 minutes each before I bring us up. All right, Fasaha, go ahead. 2 minutes. Okay, I think you have to unmute Fasaha.
معلومة ورثها ولا
اسمع لها
ورثها ولا عملي تعرف بونيرو thank you Doc we really appreciate that standing with us at the that service at the and we just did a big very impressive and then now Tigrinya خمسة سنين background stage مستقلة بس أنا حاول أجاوب صدق غيره يعني جرانتي صفقنا جرانتي أو أكتيف ونسمع نارنا بستفادة لمكانات حتى تشترك فانا كلهم كنا بتابعين ما كادرا massacre عن systematic بفانا كوجمع مرو تنارتي بس الصراحة مدن تداني جمرو خمس نورنا وبحالي بستفادة لمكانات ناجت توصل كذا عارفين كم رجيو كن نزلنا خيمة جنش تيجي كابتن استسلم تزاربنا أو خمسة ما يدلني كم كتر ويقعد سعر على حزة خمسة لنا بكيرنا خمسة نص كم زعنتنا جرنا يكون زي ما صلوا المخنيات بس نجرا كم جرنا عند خمسة نفعل تكيرنا نقدر لنا نجرس كن دحين نفعل دو خمسة نازل لنا أوشتنا بتجرنا كيرنا سنتي نص كبري دلي من الغد يعود بريتريا أقول يعود بريتريا نعول لنا أي فريس يزبل ولا سنت تجبروا أو second class بس فعل guarantee زخنا نجار إبدا نبتعمل كونسر وكاس فتحات لنا أي كم هذا سنتاج أنا ناس عشان نبدأ عم جاي زرّو نيرو أنا ميديا هذا سيكتور وكا بارامترين بنحل نجار كذا عشان نعرف المسؤولين بتاعنا أنا يتحدث بالمدرسة كبير من لكن زين كان فتو دي ولا بس ولا كون دي واقف معنا كونسر معلم أنا لي
thank you Batseba welcome thank you أنا حاطس لي at the individual level كلنا تايس نقبرنا like I know at the majority after sayzalo ናይ መንግስቲ ኮይኑ ግን at the individual level what is it that we can do like ታዩ ኣስኩም to the society
خب individual تجارب ضيعه في مسارة الدنيا.
بس هو مسارة مش وخيدة ياجن ياو تحتل بالنسبة ملكت بعلنا we have to ask ourselves I think we have to come up with a solution. قالت من سوسة الحركة ياجن نطعم 5 دقيقة سمرة 5 دقيقة أو مع closing remark يعني عندنا عزيزي خالي تعرف وين أفضلين so
الأيديا يمكن لله
yes
يغني الله كما يغني هاتو محوات تزهاكم وحابيرتا بتعمل صبوي والله ديك زهاو presentation بتعمل كنصرح له زباء قدائي تو ناي سلاحتا جينوسايد من هذه ኢትዮጵያ መንግስቲ ብደንብ ገይሩ ተቀመጥለ እናተ ኣነ ሓቶ ዝደሊ ኩሉ ዓብይ ፀገም ኔና ተጋሩ ብፍላይ ዳያስፖራ ከምቲ መጀመርያ ጦርነት ክጅመር ከሎ ሓድነት ነይሩ እዚ ግን ሓድነት የለን ዝሓድነት እዚኣስ ከመይ ጌርና ኢና ነምፃ ለቶም ፃላእትና ተፍርሖም ንሳውን ስለዝኾነ ሓደ ኮይንካ እቲ ጉዳይና ሰፊሕ እዩ ሰላእትና ከምና ውሽጢ ጥራይ ኣይኮነን ናይ ደገ እውን ዝሕግዝዎም ኣለዎ እዮም ጎኒ እዚ ኣብ ግምት ኣቲና ስኢል እቲ ህዝብና ቅድሚያ ገይረኻ ናይ ፖለቲካል ጎኒ ገዲፍካ እቶም መራሕትና እውን ብባዕልቶም ሕቶቱ ስለ ዘለው እቲ ናይ ዳያስፖራ ሓይሊ ኣጠናኺርካ ብሓደ ሰሚርካ እቲ ህዝቢ ተስፋ ንክኸውን ናይቲ ህዝቢ ጉዳይ ብፍላይ ኣብቲ ናይ ሕጊ ነገር ስሚርና ተሰራሕናሉ ዝበለፀ ይመስለኒ እሞ ሓድነት ከመይ ጌርና ነምፃ እየን ንሳ እያ ተቐንዲ ንሳ ድሕር ሓድነት ድሕር ዘይብልና ተፈላለየ ግሩፕ ስብሰባ ብዙሕ ስብሰባ ይሳተፍ እየ ብዙሕ ሓሳባት ኣሎ ግን ሓሳባት ተጠርኒፉ ብሓደ ኮይኑ እንድሕር ላይ ኸይዱ ዝነገር እዚ ክነቀሎ መፍትሒ ክነምፅእ ኣይንኽእል እዚ ፀገም ዘሎ ናይቲ ሓድነት ተዘሪጋ ሰላት ሓድነት ከመይ ጌርና ነምፃእ እያ ናብቲ ሓድነት ንክነምፅእ ተሰራሕና ዶ ይሕይሽ ክብል ኢለ እየ እኔኒ
thank you ኣንገነቶም ሰመራት
እሺ يغني لي I hope يسمع له ብጣዕሚ ናነመስግን ፕሬዘንተርስ ኩልኹም ንዘቕረብኩምዎ ብጣዕሚ ኢምፖርታንት ዝኾነ ጉዳይ እዩ ክንሓስበሉ ክንሰርሐሉ ዝግባእ ጉዳይ እዩ እቲ ናይ ማይ ካድራ ጉዳይ ከምቲ ዝፍለጥ ጠላእቲ ተሊሞም ዓሊሞም ኮነ ኢሎም ኦን ፐርፐዝ ቀዲሞም ሓሲቦም ዝገበርዎ ኮይኑ እናሃለየ ተመሊሶም ድማ ቀጥታ ሚድያ ናይ ሚድያ ዓብላልነት ስለዝነበሮም ቀልጢፎም ብኣና ወገን ከም ዝተፈፀመ ተገይሩ ንሕና ተወቃዕቲ ኣጌን ንሕና እውን ተኸሰስቲ ኮይና ዝቐረብናሉ ጉዳይ እዩ እዚ ንዕኡ ዝምጥን ሚድያ ዘይብልና ምዃንና ንዕኡ ሪኣክት ዝገብር ዝተወደበ ሓይሊ ዘይብልና ብምዃንና ከሲርናዮ ኢና ኢንፋክት ከሲርናዮ ሕጂ እውን ተተሰሪሕሉ ከምቲ ሓፍትና ምልእተ እውን ዘቕረበቶ ክዕረ ዝኽእል እዩ እቲ ናሬቲቭ ማለት እዩ ግን ብግዚኡ ክዕረ ዘይከኣለሉ ምክንያት ግን ከምኡ ስለ ዝነበረ እዩ እሞ ሕጂ እውን ግን እቲ ሰላሕታ ይቕፅል ኣሎ እቲ ጥፍኣት ይቕፅል ኣሎ ሓፍትና መንያሽማ እውን ዘቕረበቶ ካብ ሕውየት እውን ዘቕረበቶ ርኢና ኣለና ማለት እዩ እቲ ኩነታት ብዝተጋደደ እዩ ዝቕፅል ዘሎ ካብ ብሕጂ ኸ እንታይ ኢና ክንገብር ዝግባእ እዩ እቲ ናይ ንፖለቲካ ውድባት እንድሕር ንፅበ ኮይና ህልውናን ሕጂ እውን ኣብ ሓደጋ ኣሎ እዞም ሰባት እዚኣቶም ወይ እዞም ውድባት እዚኣቶም ከድሕንና ከም ዘይክእሉ ርኢናዮም ኣለና ኢን ዴር ዋች ኢንፋክት ንሳቶም ዝገበርዎ ክፍተት ናብ ከምዚ እንድሕር ወሪድና ሕጂ ኸ ንሕና ኣብ ወፃኢ ዘለና ኣብ ዲያስፖራ ዘለና ተጋሩ ሪኣክት ንክንገብር ስራሕ ንክንሰርሕ ናታቶም ፍቃድ ዲና ክንፅበ ዘለና ምክንያቱ ከምኡ ዓይነት ሰላማዊ ሰልፊ ንክግበር ፍቃድ ካብ ትግራይ ንክመፅእ ንፅበየሉ ኩነታት ስለተፈጢሩ ዝነበረ እዚ ጉዳይ እዚ ሕጂ እውን ኣብኣቶም ዘለና እምነት ጠጠው ኣቢልና ንሕና ከም ማሕበረሰብ ተወዲብና ንንቀሳቀሰሉ ኩነታት እንተዘይተፈጢሩ ብሚድያታት ኣቢሉ ሚድያታት ብምጥንኻር ብካሊእ ሕጂ እውን ናይ ምህላውና ጉዳይ ኣብ ሕቶ ምልክት ስለዝኾነ በይዛሃትኩም ንኣቶም ኣይንፀበ ንውድባት ንመንግስቲ ኣይንፀበ ባዕልና ተወዲብና ስራሕ ንስራሕ ሚድያታትና ነጠናኸር እየ ክብል ዝደሊ ይቀኒየለይ
يغنيلنا السمرة كلهم أوز للمطاخ يغنيلنا أسي اوكي أسف قبي
Okay, thanks so much. As we conclude this stage of commemoration of the Tigray Genocide, let us carry forward the memories of those we have lost, the stories of resilience, courage that have been shared today. Okay.
Okay, Hazaka.
You're good. Go ahead.
Okay, Bar, I don't know, being Zanya Khwane Hayish Bazulia. So, as we conclude this event, commemoration of the Tigray Genocide, let us carry forward the memories of those we have lost, the stories of resilience and courage that have been shared today. Our gathering is a testament to the enduring spirit of the Tigrayan people, a call to action for justice, peace, and healing. We remember the Mai Kadra massacre on November 8, 2020, which was presented by Mileti Brahanamaskan, who was among the first to interview survivors of the massacre in Sudan. We have also heard from Duke on the horrid topics of gender-based violence, the weaponization of rape, as well as siege, starvation, and tactics of war. We also heard Tedros Agaye, who has enlightened us on the role of media in spreading hate and hate speech. We also heard Nasrat Hadush on the surviving the situation around gender-based violence and weaponization of rape. Showit Balletta has also shared insights on the impact of psychological trauma of the Tigray Genocide. A heartfelt thank you for our esteemed presenters for the invaluable contributions. Your insights, expertise, and dedication have deeply enriched our understanding and underscored the importance of our continued efforts. May we continue to stand in solidarity, advocate for human rights, work towards a future where such atrocities are never repeated. Together, we can work towards honoring the past by building a brighter, more compassionate world for future generations. And as Tigrayans, we have to also learn from this experience to continue to build institutions that preserve our best interest, that serve our best interest. Thank you for your presence, your support, and your unwavering commitment to this cause. Thank you.
Anila sewa. Alright, guys, na lama anti alai samun ምድላውና ዘኽሪ ጥንታት ትግራይ እዚ መስል ነይሩ ልመፅእ ለሰሙን ብካልኦት The impact of Tigray genocide ኣብ ተፈላለዩ ኤርያስ ዝብል ካልኦት ኣጋይሽ ሒዝና ክንመፅ ኢና ኣብዚ ስለ ዝፀናሕኩም ይቐኒልና ክብረት ሃበልና ብሩኽ ሰንበት